This chest wasn't locked, so Nian stretched out his arm and opened it. 8S system, opening chest. A broken bar. Estimated completion, 37%. A broken bar. 53%. A broken bar. A tilde. Click. A tilde. The treasure chest's lid popped open. Nian reached in and dug around. For the most part, items found inside dungeon chests were generated randomly, so anything could appear. Now it was all just a matter of luck. After digging around for what seemed like half a day, Nian picked up a skill book and a necklace from the chest. Ah, it's an accessory. Guess my luck isn't too bad. Nian felt pleasantly surprised. Accessories such as rings, necklaces, and medallions were the rarest type of equipment players could receive. Since they were so difficult to find, they fetched a high price on the marketplace, and most players could only leave their accessory slots empty. Forest necklace. Properties, unidentified. Nian appraised the item using transcendent insight. Forest necklace, silver. Level requirement, 0. Properties, defense 2A3, dexterity +2, awareness +1. Weight, 1 pound. User restriction, none. What a good accessory. It's a silver tier necklace. Nian felt quite elated. He then turned to look at the skill book. It's a lesser heals skill book. The lesser heals skill was the lowest level healing skill of the priest profession. However, it was difficult to acquire since its skill book could only be found within dungeons. This was also one of the reasons its market price remained so high, to the extent it was even more valuable than some silver tier equipment. Having received the forest necklace, Nian didn't mind too much about losing the lesser heals skill book. If he were to place it up for auction, he'd only receive around 3 silver. Such an insignificant sum wasn't worth batting his eye over. Nian descended the cliff and met up with the team. We're pretty lucky. The chest dropped a necklace and a lesser heal skill book. You guys can have the skill book since I don't need it, but I'll be taking the necklace, Nian said. He didn't have to pay a single cent when taking an item. On the other hand, Yulan, Blue Feather, and her team had to share their profits with Dusk and Tang Yao. After all, the two were invited here and couldn't just leave empty-handed. It's a silver-grade necklace. Bai Kaijui's, plain boiled water, and the other's eyes practically fell out of their sockets. A silver-grade necklace. Now just how much was that worth? The group watched in anguish as Nian put the necklace away. It's such a pity. A broken bar. Why does it have to belong to someone else? If it weren't for him finding this chest, we would have never gotten this lesser heals skill book in the first place. It would be better if we just buy this skill book off of you, brotherly, Yulan said. She wasn't willing to take advantage of Nian's generosity. The skill book was brought back by his own efforts. They hadn't done anything to help at all. Since you put it that way, our broken bar, I'll be straightforward and sell it to you. The market price for a lesser heals skill book is around 3 silvers, possibly even more. However, I'll lower the price and sell it to you for cheaper at 2 silvers. How does that sound? This price can't be considered disadvantageous to you, right? Nian replied. He wasn't the least bit reserved in agreeing to Yulan's request. Couldn't you have just politely declined instead? Yao Yao interjected, stamping her feet. Nian calmly laughed and replied, since someone is so adamant about spending their money, why should I refuse? Only fools would refuse money. If you want this lesser heals skill book, I can give it to you. Even if you wanted 10 of them, I would still help you find them. However, your captain wants to buy it instead because she doesn't want to owe me any favors. Let's say I disregard her sentiments and politely refuse her for a broken bar. Even if you wouldn't mind me being a hypocrite, I'd still be despising myself for being one. Our team funds are only around 5 silvers a broken bar. Would it be possible to pay you the 2 silvers at a later date? Yulan asked in slight embarrassment. If she paid the 2 silvers now, their funds would be even more lacking than they were now. Are your funds that lacking? You even need to owe someone 2 silvers? Whatever, you can pay me back whenever you want, Nian replied and waved his hands. An entire team couldn't even bring out 2 silvers a broken bar. Although that appeared quite pathetic, most teams only had 2 silvers. In reality, Yulan and her team were quite well off. They were just naturally no match when paired up against a walking money bag like Nian. The entire team stared at Nian. These were 2 silvers. It wasn't paltry amount, yet he still didn't attach any importance to them. This man was truly rich and overbearing. Yao Yao pulled at Nian's sleeves and gazed at him while blinking her innocent eyes. She asked in a harmless and sincere tone, "Nian, a broken bar, would you really be willing to gift me 10 skill books?" "You are broken bar, sure, but you never told me where I could find those 10 skill books to give you." Nian felt a cold sweat run down his forehead. He knew exactly what sort of wicked thoughts were running through this enchantress mind. HMPH. "You don't even have the least bit of sincerity," Yao Yao replied and feigned anger. Nevertheless, the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. Of course, she would never actually ask Nian to give her 10 lesser heal skill books. She only wanted to tease him a bit, that's all. Tang Yao glanced at the overhanging cliff. He was actually able to spot that chest all the way over there. He was increasingly unable to make sense of Nian. The changes in this childhood friend of his became even greater and greater, to the point where even he was having slight troubles recognizing him. However, one thing remained certain. No matter how much Nian changed, he would always remain as his brother. "Alright, let's focus on the matter at hand. We're going to have to kill those 2 dark elves that have been stalking from behind. There's a ravine in the area. We'll split up into 2 groups. I'll lead the first group into the ravine while the second group trails us. Those 2 dark elves are quite crafty, so we'll have to lure them into the ravine and trap them in there by blocking their exit. Afterward, we'll use the disillusioning powder to reveal them. However, I want everyone to stay on full alert. Even though those 2 dark elves don't possess much fighting strength, they make up for it with their speed. We have to make sure they don't escape, otherwise, it'll be very difficult to make them fall for the same trick twice." Nian ordered and began carrying out his strategy. The team separated into 2 groups. The first group of 10 remained on standby while the second group advanced into the ravine. While moving forward, Nian paid careful attention to his surroundings. He noticed the slight movement of a silhouette 11 meters ahead. The other one didn't follow? Nian questioned inwardly. However, he was then able to sense something following them from behind. The entity kept 10 meters of distance between them. "They're both here." Nian's lips curved into a faint smile. "These 2 elves are quite cowardly, afraid to even separate from themselves." "Good. We'll wipe them both out at once." Nian and the group entered the ravine. On either side of them were towering walls of rocks around 10 meters high. In between was a small trail that was able to fit 5 or 6 players walking side by side. This narrow ravine was the perfect site to set up an ambush. However, they had to succeed on the first try. Those 2 crafty elves wouldn't be easily fooled twice. Nian sensed the 2 elves were hesitating at the entrance of the ravine. After a brief moment, they entered and followed. They took the bait. "Good, now they're trapped just like a turtle in a jar." Nian inwardly rejoiced. He then ordered through the team chat, "Yulan, you guys can come over now. Block the ravine's entrance and by all means, don't let those crafty buggers escape." Yulan felt strange and somewhat uncomfortable when Nian addressed her without any honorifics, but this wasn't the time to bother with such a matter. She led the remaining team members and rushed over to the ravine. "You are here." Yulan informed. Nian retrieved the disillusioning powder and threw it in the air, whereupon the powder scattered and floated across the ravine. The powder's area of effect constantly expanded and eventually covered the entire ravine. When the powder landed on the nearby shadows, the figures of the 2 impish elves were gradually revealed. With pointed ears, their emaciated figures were nearly all skin and bone while the color of their skin was a dark ashy gray. Besides their physical feature, the clothing on their body was shabby and worn out. While the high elves in the game were beautiful and handsome, these 2 dark elves were so shamefully ugly it was no wonder they were always hidden. "Raikth!" One of the elves let out a near-piercing screech. Both elves turned their backs and frantically dashed towards the ravine's exit, like a pair of hares. Their movements were quite nimble. Nonetheless, They were quite fragile as well and only had around 100 health. A single round of spells was enough to kill them instantly. "You want to run?" In your dreams, as if he were an arrow released from a bow, Nian quickly shot out from behind. The rest of the group trailed him and followed in pursuit. Right now, Yulan's group should have already blocked off the exit before the two elves made it too far. They were immediately stopped in their tracks upon reaching the ravine's passage. Sure enough, Yulan and her group had already arrived and firmly stood in place, blocking off the elves' only path to freedom. They were already trapped with no hope of escape. The two elves quickly glanced at each other before dashing towards the cliff face. When they had scaled 3 meters of the cliff, Nian arrived right behind them and suddenly leapt into the air. He reached out with his arm and managed to grab one of the elves by the leg. He then extended his left hand and shot out a line of webbing from his ring of woven silk. As the web line wrapped itself around the other elf's leg, he pulled back sharply and flung the two elves off the cliff face. Air crush. Their bodies made heavy contact with the ground, causing a cloud of dust to form and rise in the air. With Nian's dexterity and jump range being so high, his range of movements and speed were astonishing to a frightening degree. These two dark elves simply weren't his match. Shortly after the rest of the team arrived and surrounded the two elves, the mages raised their staffs and prepared to unleash a rain of spells. Raiha broken bar, Raiegka broken bar. The two elves revealed pleading expressions on their faces. "Hold up, don't kill them for now." Nian's heart jumped in excitement. In his previous life, the player only needed to kill these two elves and Einpat's flute would drop. When they handed the flute back to Einpat, they could proceed with the dungeon. However, he had never come across a situation such as this, where the elves wouldn't fight back and instead pleaded for their lives. In his previous life, the highest completion rate attained for this dungeon was only around 75%. Even 10 years into the game, no one beat the dungeon to full completion. Yet at present, he couldn't say for sure these two elves wouldn't lead him to any information regarding the missing 25%. When he was level 4 in his previous life, the stats of his game character simply couldn't compare with his stats right now. At that time, he was only an average low-level player, unable to obtain even a simple set of bronze-grade equipment for himself. There was no need to even mention ludicrous aspirations such as attaining the legendary chapter of courage. In short, the dexterity and jump range of his previous character were too inadequate. Let alone capturing these dark elves. Even overtaking them was impossible. Therefore every team at the time, including his owner, could only blast them with magic when they attempted to scale the ravine's walls. With their two bodies curled up like potato bugs, the two elves knelt on the ground and gazed at Nian with begging expressions in the hopes that he would spare their lives. The elves spoke in an ancient language Nian wasn't proficient with, the language of the elves. However, from their body language and expressions, he could roughly tell they were begging for forgiveness. "Who here can speak Elvish?" Nian turned around and asked the team. The surrounding team members gazed at each other before shaking their heads. They only knew one language in the game, and that was the common language spoken in the Empire. As for Elvish, from the start, let alone understanding it, no one had even heard of its existence before. Nian silently pondered. If no one knew Elvish, communicating with these two dark elves would basically be impossible. He glanced at his own language menu. At present, there were only 4 languages: Common, Dragon, Ancient Common, and Cassate Giant. Suddenly, he had another thought. These dark elves are an ancient race and possess extremely long lifespans. Perhaps they'll understand other languages? Petty and frail dark elves, why have you come here? Nian spoke in dragon tongue. Nian spoke various syllables in a deep tone. The sound of his voice frightened the surrounding team members. However, they soon realized he was simply speaking another language. Upon hearing the dragon language, the two elves were badly frightened, even trembling as they gazed at Nian. One of the elves, who was somewhat more courageous, continued to stare at him with caution and bewilderment. Eventually, he drummed up enough courage and crawled towards Nian's feet, kissing them before he fell back and began to speak. The elf also spoke in dragon tongue. "Long live the dragon god. This one's name is Vasarine. My lord, I sincerely ask of you, a broken bar. Are you of the dragon race, disguised as human? During the distant Dark Era, the Dark Elves were unlike the other races. As one of the races enslaved by the dragon race, they didn't join the rebellion with races such as humans, high elves, and dwarves in fighting for their freedom. Their society and faith remained pious in their belief of the dragons. Even now, those existences that were currently hidden within the deepest corners of the world were still worthy of their reverence and loyalty. Nian felt elated. Humans who knew Dragon Tongue were few and far between. This dark elf had been scared witless and mistook him for an actual dragon. It's best if I take advantage of this misunderstanding. Indeed, long live the dragon god. Dark elf Vaserine, I do not wish to repeat myself. Why have you come to this place? Nian spoke in Dragon Tongue once again. My lord, our Drow Dark Elf tribe suffered a crushing defeat at the Hilton stronghold. In the chaos and confusion, my companion and I passed through the plains and escaped to this forest, Vaserine replied. Dark Elf Vaserine, a broken bar. So it turns out you two were deserters from the battle at Hilton stronghold. My lord, we are not deserters. This one named Vaserine is a brave and courageous soldier. We are gathering intelligence for our tribe. In the evening 3 days from now, our Drow tribe will strike back at the Hilton stronghold. At that time, Dark Elf Vaserine will once again return to the battlefield. Vaserine spoke with courage and conviction. 8S System. New quest received. Bring the heads of the 2 Dark Elves to Sir Cavrot in the Hilton stronghold and inform him before the Drow tribe commences their counterattack. A branching quest line. This was an exciting discovery. However, Nian still maintained a calm and collected outer appearance. He continued to speak to Vaserine as if everything was normal. As for the opposite party, Vaserine believed Nian was a dragon. He truthfully answered each and one of Nian's questions without exception and didn't dare to conceal even a shred of information. As Nian and the Dark Elf continued to speak in the strange language, the team members had various thoughts. Just what were they talking about? Those Dark Elves seemed to be quite fearful of Nian as well. Why was that? Everyone felt shocked. Just when did Nian learn the language of other races? Dark Elf Vaserine, the giant caretaker, is a friend of mine. He informed me that you've stolen his flute. Tell me, how shall I enact your punishment? Upon hearing Nian's words, Vaserine kowtowed repeatedly and begged for forgiveness. He then took out the flute and handed it to Nian. The entire flute was lacquer black while its surface was carved in turtle shell patterns. As Nian examined it, he noticed the flute appeared very simple and unadorned. He then glanced at its properties. Einpat's flute, quest item. Level requirement, 0. Description: a flute used by the treant caretaker, able to affect surrounding treants. Properties: willpower plus 20, strength plus 20, reflex plus 20, health plus 300. Reduces the stats of surrounding treants by 50%. User restriction: can only be equipped within the treant forest. No mistake, that's the flute we're looking for. Once Nian put the flute away, he sent an order through the team chat. Ekildam. The surrounding mages raised their staffs and began chanting their magic. To the team's surprise, the 2 Dark Elves didn't resist and remained kneeling on the ground. They stayed motionless and silent as they awaited their deaths. Boom, boom, boom. The spells rained down on the 2 elves. They remained firmly kneeling even when suffering the assault. It was only until their health bars fell empty that the 2 could no longer hold themselves up. Their lifeless corpses slumped to the ground, collapsing with a gentle thud that brought a small cloud of dust into the air. A broken bar. 8S System. You've obtained Dark Elf's head. Quantity, 2 8. Alright. Now that's settled and done with. Good. They even dropped a pair of warrior boots. When they died, decide between yourselves who gets it. We'll be heading off to kill the Treant King next, Nian announced. This is going to be the first time in history a team finishes this dungeon with a perfect completion rate. Capturing those 2 Dark Elves led to a pleasant surprise. Nian, what did you and those Dark Elves talk about? Why did it seem like they were very afraid of you? Not to mention when we were attacking them, they didn't even dare to retaliate. Yao Yao asked after walking to Nian's side. The rest of the team also stared at Nian with inquisitive gazes. Even Yilan couldn't help but focus her attention on him. A broken bar. Oh, that was nothing. I just spoke to them in dragon tongue, and they mistook me for a real dragon. The Dark Elves have been slaves to the dragon race since the ancient Dark era. Even in the present, their society still considers themselves servants of the dragons, which is why they were so respectful and fearful of me. Thanks to the information they provided, I also received a branching quest line, so I'll be handing it in after we return to town, Nian replied. Dragon tongue? When did you learn the dragon language? Yao Yao asked. It appeared Nian still held quite a few secrets, since he continued revealing surprises one after the other. Yeah, I heard dragons were extremely rare, Tang Yao added. Nian was truly becoming more and more outstanding. Even the language of the dragons wasn't out of his reach. In the same moment, Dusk's eyes sparkled as he thought of a certain possibility. Could Nian's ability to speak dragon tongue be related to the emergence of that dragon in Link Town? Nian soon realized his slip of the tongue and turned to look at Dusk. From the expression on the latter's face, he could tell this fellow had grasped onto some clues. Yesterday, actually, I ended up accidentally stumbling into a ravine where I found an old book. When I turned the pages, I discovered it was actually an old history which recorded the events of past eras. Before I knew it, I received an announcement telling me I learned the dragon tongue, Cassate Giant, and Ancient Common. Afterward, that dragon emerged and chased me around before I managed to make a lucky escape, Nian replied in a casual manner. This explanation was specifically directed towards Dusk. He felt it was better to partially tell the truth than to allow the existence of the chapter of courage to be leaked. Dusk readily accepted the explanation. After all, he didn't too feel good sticking his nose so deeply into another person's secrets either. Truthfully, learning new languages isn't that hard at all. Head over to the library when your levels are higher, and if you pay 1 gold, you'll be able to learn the ancient common language. Also, if you head to the libraries belonging to the giant race, you'll be able to learn the Cassate Giant language after paying 3 gold. How do you know all this? Dusk and the others asked in astonishment. Head over to the library and look for yourself. Just browse through some of the books there, and you'll have an even better understanding of the entire Atlanta continent. There are various profession-related books as well. If you manage to read them all, I guarantee you'll be experts as well. Who the hell goes to the library? An entire library has so many books. Even if you randomly pull one off the shelf, it'll still have up to 1,000,000 characters. If I had to read every profession and history-related book in the library, it would take me a month at the very least. Who the hell has that much free time on their hands? Yeah, who has the time to read those thick and heavy books? In his past life, Nian often suffered setbacks while playing his thief and developed an interest in reading as a result. After spending over a month reading at the library, he couldn't help but admit the history of the Atlanta continent as well as its stories were quite fascinating and engaging. From the origins of his profession to the biographies of legendary thieves and their abilities, he read it all without missing a single word. Thanks to his exceptional memory, he gained many insights. By the time he walked out of the library, he left with a thorough understanding of his profession. After several more years of polishing his skills, he ranked as one of the top 50 thieves and was somewhat famous. I've only read a few myself. The biographies there are pretty well written, Nian said with a smile. Nian still had the leisure to go to the library and read. They had frequently risked life and death to reach their current level, yet they were still easily overtaken by Nian. The crowd couldn't help but feel a little disheartened at such a thought. Many of the team members sighed deeply and no longer had the heart to inquire any further. Who knows what sort of rewards you'll receive after turning in that quest? Bai Kai Jui, plain boiled water, exclaimed, voicing out a similar thought among the crowd. Ultimately the topic everyone still cared for the most was the quest rewards. What was that flute that dropped just a moment ago? It's a quest item called Pat's flute. We'll have to return it to that old man before we exit the dungeon. Nian displayed the flute's properties for the rest of the team to see, whereupon everyone inhaled a breath of cold air. The flute's properties were simply astonishing. If it could be brought outside of the dungeon, it would most certainly cause every player to go crazy over it. However, Nian didn't feel too much of a loss regarding this flute because he already possessed the chapter of courage. It's such a pity. Why do we have to return it to the NPC? Many of the team members felt aggrieved. Nian opened the trade menu and traded the flute over to Bai Kaijui. This item had to be handed over to the team's main tank for it to be used to its fullest potential. Holy crap. I have over 700 health. Even if it's the Treant King, I'll have nothing to be afraid of, Bai Kaijui confidently boasted after checking his improved stats. Don't underestimate the Treant King on Specialist. That thing is really difficult to deal with. Wait and see. You'll be eating your own words very soon. After splashing cold water over Bai Kaijui's parade, Nian said, since our priests aren't able to learn revive yet, we'll have a much easier time if two of them can cast Lesser Heal. I know another location that drops a Lesser Heal skill book, so we'll be heading there next. No way, right? Is the Treant King really that difficult to deal with on Specialist difficulty? Bai Kaijui asked in shock. After all, he had never faced the Treant King on this difficulty before. He quickly reined himself in after listening to Nian's words. A broken bar. From the moment they entered this dungeon to now, the profits the team earned surpassed everyone's expectations. Even if they discounted the items Nian took for himself, the amount of equipment and skill books they obtained still far exceeded their imaginations. They even thought it would be great if Nian could continue carrying their team just like this. However, this was nothing more than wishful thinking. He was never part of their team in the first place, and his cooperation with them would end after this run. Furthermore, he would never join their team in another dungeon run again. When they thought back to his previous statements, they couldn't help but feel a little angry. They grumbled and voiced complaints in their hearts. Why did Chen Bo have to go and piss off Nian? Originally, they too had felt somewhat dissatisfied when they witnessed Nian driving Chen Bo out. After all, Chen Bo was still a member of their team and Nian's actions at that time really did seem excessive. Yet at present, they were having a subtle change of heart. Having obtained Dinpat's flute, Bai Kaijui became a genuine and formidable meat shield. With a priest casting Lesser Heal from the backline, he became an unequaled tank that was able to contend against 5 Treants alone. After he equipped the flute, it became much easier for the team to clear the path ahead. As they progressed through the run, the amount of equipment they looted quickly piled up. They obtained another Lesser Heal skill book and 2 pieces of silver-grade equipment. One of them was a pair of thief gloves which was given to Nian. They increased strength by 3 and awareness by 2. The other piece was a recently dropped round shield that raised defense by 15% and increased physique by 5. When the shield dropped, everyone's eyes went wide with shock because it was the first time they had seen such a high-quality shield. Round shields were fundamentally different from normal shields. Their defense was relatively lower compared to regular shields. However, their low weight meant they didn't hinder a player's movements as much as a regular shield would. Thus, round shields with high defense were a hot and very costly commodity in the marketplace. Damn, even the round shield we got from Black Flame Forest wasn't as good as this one. Dusk widened his eyes in shock. What kind of drop rate was this? Good equipment was just dropping one after another as they progressed towards the boss. He didn't mind passing on the previous drops because they were only bronze grade. However, at present, such an amazing silver-grade round shield suddenly appeared. If you guys are willing to sell, I guarantee my captain would be willing to pay 10 silvers or even higher for that round shield. Everyone present understood the significance of the heavy knight with a good shield. A tank that was able to withstand a boss attacks ensured the survival of the whole team. Therefore, heavy knight equipment with high defense was extremely expensive on the marketplace. The bidding on this type of equipment in the auction house reached new records. However, even so, they remained targets for teams from the larger guilds. We don't plan on selling this shield. Yulan took in a deep breath of air. This shield meant they could still try and take on higher level dungeons even without Nian's help, let alone 10 silvers. Even if it was for 20 silvers, she still wouldn't sell. Yulan, Blue Feather, glanced at Nian, who stood off to the side in a laissez-faire manner. She thought of the ever-increasing amount of favors they owed him. If this continued, it would soon reach a point where they couldn't possibly repay him. Yao Yao, dark mystery, give Nian our thanks. We would have never been able to get all this good equipment if it weren't for him, Yulan suggested. In retrospect, Nian's conditions hadn't been excessive at all. Yao Yao replied. She then walked to Nian's side, her bright eyes examining his expression as she approached. What are you looking at me for? Nian glanced at Yao Yao and smiled. We'll be taking the round shield. You really don't mind losing out on it? Yao Yao faintly smiled and a pair of dimples emerged on her unblemished face. Nian's pulse slightly raced after seeing her elegant yet bewitching smile. However, when he thought of Xi Yao, he immediately regained his composure. It's just a round shield. Do you really think I'm that stingy of a person? In any case, I'm already pretty satisfied as it is. I get to take any useful drops I want, and the Featherfall jewel from the Treant King goes to me as well. When we entered the dungeon, did you guys not put in effort too? I definitely couldn't clear this dungeon on my own, he replied. Well, that shield is worth quite a bit of money. My captain asked me to thank you on the team's behalf. Oh? Nian glanced at the nearby Yulan. She was tall, slender, and had a voluptuous figure which could be called perfect. If there were a few more smiles on her face, then she would be rated as quite decent. Moreover, from his memory, he recalled she was quite a prideful figure. It was seldom that she would ever lower her head to someone. As for what he knew about her, it was limited to a certain event where a player took too many liberties with her, and she retaliated by going on a rampage and killing him until he dropped back to level 0. At that point in time, the only thought on Nian's mind was that this woman was extremely terrifying. However, after becoming more familiar with each other, he came to understand she had a quiet and amiable personality. Thus, she never left him with any sort of bad impression. Besides glancing back at her figure every once in a while, he didn't really have many opinions of her. He had never really chatted much with her either, and by the end, they were nothing more than nodding acquaintances. A broken bar. With the new equipment spurring them forward, the team members became even more spirited as they cleared mobs, especially Bai Kaijui, plain boiled water, who charged into every battle. Nian and the others took a detour and headed onto a smaller path where they encountered a group of 5 treants. Shortly after making swift work of those treants, another lesser heal skill book dropped from one of their corpses, just as Nian had said earlier. From then on, the number of priests who could cast lesser heal on their team rose to 2. As their group progressed, they completely cleared the path of any and all treants. Eventually, they penetrated into the deepest part of the forest and entered a clearing. The surrounding vegetation visibly lessened. Moreover, no more treants emerged on the path, and even the presence of fauna and insects disappeared. We're almost there. Be wary of the vines beneath your feet, Nian warned as he raised his guard. He walked at the front of the group and opened up a path by disarming each and every trap along the route. As the team drew closer to the center of the forest, 2 vines which were lying motionless on the ground suddenly sprang to life. Like real serpents, the 2 vines snaked their way closer and shot towards Nian. Nian sidestepped the attack and switched to a reverse grip. A/S/. The vines were severed upon meeting his blade and fell to the ground. The people in the back also suffered attacks. However, they were safer due to their numbers. Even if actual danger befell one of the members, the others around them could come to the rescue. Therefore, no problems occurred in the back. After passing through the clearing, Nian and the team finally caught sight of the Treant King. It resembled an immense tree towering at over 10 meters high and several meters wide, many times larger than the average treant. Its leaves and branches shrouded the entire sky and cast an immense shadow over the area. However, its most distinct feature lay in the ash-black bark that covered its entire body. The Treant King awoke from its deep slumber, aware of the approaching players as a cold, sinister glow radiated from its ancient eyes. Treant King, Lord, level 5, health, 10,000 10,000. It's Lord class. Dusk screamed in shock. The Treant King had only been an elite class monster when he and his team ran this dungeon. Not only did this version have much more health than its normal difficulty counterpart, it was even upgraded to a higher class. If it weren't for such an overpowered item like Ein Pat's flute, even if the entire elite team from Holy Empire came over and joined them, they'd likely still end up being wiped. Everyone, prepare yourselves and get into formation. Wait for the heavy knight to engage before going in. There's no need to feel anxious. Just listen to my commands, Nian reassured before sprinting towards the Treant King. He stopped upon entering the boss line of sight. Wretched humans! For trespassing might herit or a broken bar die. The Treant King roared deeply and slammed a gigantic branch towards Nian. 8 boom. 8 its gigantic arm left a deep mark on the earth. However, Nian had already rolled out of the way. At that moment, Nian had already fled and circled around its side. The Treant King raised its gigantic arm again and swept it towards Nian. As he watched the massive arm spanning towards him, Nian abruptly lowered his body and slipped into a slide. 8 evoom. The Treant's sweeping attack hurtled above and past his head. The fierce pressure alone was enough to cause pain as the wind scraped against his cheek. Just a little bit slower and I would have been swatted into the air by its attack. Nian got up and fled in the other direction. Although the Treant King was overbearing and fierce, during the whole course of events, none of its attacks were able to reach Nian, who evaded like a slippery loach. An average team would have most likely sent their heavy knight, who held Ein Pat's flute, to engage first, since only that player could withstand the attacks of the Treant King. However, they would have neglected one key point. Heavy knights, as their namesake would suggest, wore heavy armor which caused their movements to be hindered and clumsy. They were unable to dodge the Treant King's attacks, which had a strong knockback effect. Thus, they had no chance of closing in on the Treant King without others covering for them. However, if another player were to be struck by an attack, they would undoubtedly die. Nian's movements seemed awkward whenever he evaded the Treant King's attacks. Each time the team believed he was going to die from one of the attacks, they would discover he miraculously survived by dodging, rolling, or jumping out of the way at the very last second. More or less, he appeared to be more scared than hurt as he survived every encounter without mishap. Dusk, however, felt shocked by Nian's actions. Holy shit, he can even do this? What a godly thief. He subconsciously began comparing Nian with the other thieves in his team. However, he suddenly came to the realization that there wasn't a single thief within Holy Empire who could compare to Nian. If there were a thief with even half of Nian's skills in his team, they'd already be quite terrific. From Nian's perspective, the Treant King's attacks were slow and predictable. Each attack gave more than a second of reaction time to get out of the way. Thus, evading its attacks really wasn't much of a problem. It was simple and extremely easy, just like an adult being asked to do a grade school's math homework. After making sure the boss aggro was fully on him, Nian gave an order through the team chat. 8 by Kaijui. Take the lead and engage the boss. The rest of the frontliners will follow after. Backline, under no circumstances are you to go within 30 meters of the boss. 8 Bai Kaijui rushed towards the Treant King. Since the boss' attention was completely focused on Nian, he quickly arrived in front of it. He struck the boss with shield bash and followed with heroic strike. A'36 A'52. Damn it. The Treant King has such higher defense. Even with Ein Pat's flute, his attacks still dealt so little damage to it. Shortly after Bai Kaijui's engaged the boss, the other frontliners arrived as well and firmly surrounded the Treant King. Under Bai Kaijui's fierce assault, the boss aggro quickly shifted. It swept its arm and began attacking him instead. 8 images, attack. 8 just when Nian finished speaking, numerous spells flew into the air. 8 bang, bang, bang. 8 the spells bombarded the Treant King's body. Roughly a dozen damage numbers appeared above the Treant King's head before drifting upwards and fading away. Most of them were in the low tens and some of them were even misses. However, 2 of them were in the 30s. These were the attacks from Dusk and Tang Yao. Dusk's Dark Winter set and Tang Yao's Fire Chaser set were both from Black Flame Forest. Thus, both of their damage numbers were rather decent. The Treant King's extremely thick bark served as an effective defense against the players' attacks. Therefore, the damage they dealt could be considered quite decent. The king indignantly roared as it hoisted its massive arm into the air and swiped at Bai Kaijui, plain boiled water. 8 bang. 8 its gigantic branch of an arm slammed into his shield. However, Bai Kaijui kept his center of gravity low and allowed the shield to absorb the majority of the impact. It resulted in him being pushed back a few steps. However, he ran forward and closed the distance immediately. Bai Kaijui felt grateful for the advice given to him prior, of how he should remain stable and firm. Sure enough, it became quite useful in this situation. Ordinarily, he wouldn't have merely been pushed back a few steps in such an exchange. Rather, he would have likely been sent flying. Those strikes were quite horrifying, each one reducing his health by 80 or so points. However, he was the sole person able to withstand its attacks, as the other frontliners would inevitably die within 2 strikes. Beams of gentle light fell on the players who were in a melee with the boss. In the meantime, Nian evaluated the strength of the team's healers. Of the 3 priests who knew lesser heal, the main one healed roughly 60 health while the remaining 2 barely reached 50. Not that high. Things will likely get dangerous later. Seems like it's best to remain careful and not leave anything to chance. Due to the efforts of Bai Kaijui and the other frontliners, the flow of the battle stabilized. Thus, the mages could begin steadily casting their magic. 8 cast fire elemental magic as much as possible and avoid ice magic. It won't be effective since the boss ice resistance is too high. 8 Nian ordered and circled round the treant's back since his profession received a damage bonus, 30%, while attacking opponents from behind. Paired with his exceptional equipment, his attacks easily pierced its strong defenses. Sparks flew off its body and into the air as magic poured from the sky. Its health had been gradually chipped away and now neared 70%. 8 Do any of our priests have dispel? 8 Eon of them does. 8 Great. Pay attention to Bai Kaijui. Immediately cast Dispel when the boss casts the fear debuff on him. Don't be slow, even a second can cost us a lot of trouble. 8 Nian said. The priest felt somewhat anxious as he listened to Nian's instructions. After all, he was still a novice at the game. He was nicknamed Bamboo Pole by Bai Kaijui and the others due to his naturally lanky build. He felt quite nervous at the moment, anxiously gripping his staff while his muscles appeared to have been frozen stiff. However, Nian noticed his apprehension and spoke reassuringly. A relax a bit. I'll remind you when the time comes, so all you'll have to do is cast Dispel on my signal. Afterward, Bamboo Pole shot a grateful glance at Nian. Just as its health reached 70%, the boss released a deep roar that sent shivers down everyone's spine. Meanwhile, Bai Kaijui halted his attacks and involuntarily retreated back while his movements became extremely rigid. 8 Dispel. 8 Nian shouted through the team's voice chat. Without delay, Bamboo Pole cast Dispel and a bright light illuminated Bai Kaijui from above. Bai Kaijui had only retreated a few steps when feared. He charged back into battle and slammed his shield at the Treant King with Shield Bash. 8 Not bad. 8 Nian praised. Bamboo Pole instantly felt relief seeing as his spell succeeded. Following Nian's directions, the entire team fell into the rhythm of battle. Coupled with the fact that he knew the Treant King's actions in advance, its health bar steadily fell lower. It's using Lash. The Treant King lifted its vines and sent them lashing at Bai Kaijui. 8 Priests, prepare to heal Bai Kaijui in 3. A broken bar to broken bar and near broken bar now. 8 A gentle shower of light shone on Bai Kaijui and his health continuously teetered up and down. A line separating life and death lay on a razor-thin edge. However, thanks to the priests, his health managed to hold until the end. Nian, on the other hand, released a flurry of attacks from behind. Roughly 3 minutes later, The entire team had steadily chipped away as its health fell to merely 25%. 8 priests, how much mana remaining? 8 was 67 exclamation mark 8 56 exclamation mark 8 23 exclamation mark 8 priest with 23 mana, drink your mana potion. 8 The priest downed a basic mana potion after Nian called him out. A broken bar. Suddenly, the Treant King transformed into a shade of red. 8 finally a broken bar. Everyone, get ready. Bai Kaijui, switch to a defensive stance. Mages, increase your damage output. Priests, prepare yourselves. 8 Nian shouted. Bai Kaijui, in the moment he heard these instructions, held the shield to his chest and switched stances. The Treant King let out an explosive roar. It raised its arms and slammed down on Bai Kaijui. 8 bang. 8 The Treant King's gigantic arms landed on Bai Kaijui's shield and sent him several steps back, losing over 200 health in the exchange. However, even after such a terrifying attack, the Treant King was unwilling to give up. It raised its arm once more and relentlessly smashed. 8 bang, bang. 8 The assault left 2 more craters in the earth while a gentle shower of light fell on Bai Kaijui in between the attacks. A'221 plus 60. A'256 plus 52. Above Bai Kaijui's head, 4 numbers floated upwards as he was repelled back. 8 Such high damage. 8 If it weren't for Einpat's flute, just one of those attacks would instantly kill even the most powerful fighter. Bai Kaijui felt a cold chill run down his spine as he glanced at his health bar. If it weren't for the timely heals from the priests, he would have long been dead. The Treant King had finished its 3-hit combo and seemed to have come to a rest. However, a moment later, it continued its onslaught of battering their tank. 8 Bai Kaijui, pull back. The rest of you guys, hold the line for a bit. 8 Nian began running to Bai Kaijui's side. Bai Kaijui dodge-rolled the Treant King's next attack and downed a basic health potion. However, the amount of health restored was basically negligible compared to his current total health. The other frontliners rushed up to take Bai Kaijui's place, forming a human shield as they blocked the Treant King's advance. However, they could only hold it off for a limited time since their defense and health were much lower in comparison to the one they were replacing. Nian arrived at Bai Kaijui's side and applied an intermediate combat bandage. Plus 20 A broken bar, plus 20 A broken bar, plus 20 A broken bar. Drink a basic recovery potion. I already drank one. Wait for the next round of healing from the priests. 2 priests cast lesser heal on Bai Kaijui. After 10 seconds, more than half of his health had recovered. The other frontliners couldn't hold on much longer. There was no one left to take another attack. After all, 2 hits and any one of them would be dead. If the Treant King scored a critical hit, even if they were full health, they would instantly die. Furthermore, 2 of their members had already been killed and sent to the graveyard. Bai Kaijui, go back in. Nian ordered when Bai Kaijui's health had recovered past 400. Bai Kaijui raised his shield and ran up to meet the boss. They had been in a state of crisis just now. Thus, no one dared to be any more careless. Tang Yao, Dusk, and the rest of the backline took out their most powerful spells, unloading each and every one on the Treant King. 8 will be out of mana soon. 8 Tang Yao anxiously said. 8 cast arcane fireballs. It expends the least amount of mana. Warriors and paladins, go all out. Use flame slash. 8 Nian replied. They only needed to hold out for a little longer. Victory was right before their eyes. They absolutely couldn't fail at the final stretch of the battle. He circled behind the Treant King and used Vital Strike followed by Assassinate. The Treant's health steadily fell. 9% a broken bar, 8% a broken bar, 6% a broken bar. The team became increasingly nervous. None of them were willing to slow down by the slightest degree. 8 bang, bang, bang. 8 fireballs landed on the Treant King's body and left deep wounds upon impact. 3%. 8 eel frontliners, retreat. Mages, Give it everything you've got. 8 Nian suddenly instructed through the team chat. Their warriors and paladins didn't understand why Nian would have them retreat at such a crucial moment. However, they still listened to his orders without the slightest hint of hesitation and pulled back. Nian had been the one who carried them to this point in the run. Thus, they had unwittingly come to acknowledge his ability and held faith in his commands. Heaving one of its massive stumps into the air, the Treant King forcefully stamped on the ground. Wart Ranpal. 8 E boom. 8 Like a giant hammer striking the surface, the stump transmitted a powerful force deep into the earth which violently shook the ground. Soon, large fractures began forming on the surface, spreading to the nearby surroundings, appearing as if they would rend the entire world asunder. Then powerful shock waves erupted from the depths, pouring volatile magical energy onto the surface. The frontliners felt their hearts tighten as they witnessed the tyrannical might of this skill, because likely then and there, they would have been instantly killed were it not for Nian ordering them to retreat. Furthermore, with their absence and only the ranged units remaining, the team would certainly lack the damage necessary to finish off the boss, leading to a possible wipe as a consequence. Oftentimes even the slightest of mistakes could reverse the outcome of a battle. Re-engage. The boss doesn't have much health left. Faster everyone, faster! Nian shouted. Their next step was to simply finish off the Treant King, then everything would be fine. Besides, with so little health remaining, it couldn't possibly do any more to reverse the situation. Heroic strike. Radiant slash. A volley of magic poured into the sky. 8 Bang, bang, bang. 8 The spells blasted its body, depleting the boss of what little health it had remaining. Upon entering its death throes, the Treant King mournfully moaned as cracks began appearing all over its body. A moment later a broken bar. 8 boom. 8 An explosion rocked the area as its body splintered into pieces and fell to the ground as a pile of wood debris. The Treant King is dead. We succeeded. All of the team members excitedly cheered. For a team like theirs, clearing this specialist dungeon was simply a remarkable and unimaginable achievement. In the exact moment they toppled the Treant King over, everyone felt like they were in a dream, as if everything that happened wasn't real. However, this dream was in fact reality, and an indescribable feeling of admiration arose in their hearts. Before meeting Nian, their team hadn't even been able to clear this dungeon on easy difficulty. Yet while following his lead, they were able to directly beat it on specialist difficulty, a truly an inconceivable feat. Seeing everyone's joyous and excited expressions, Nian broke into a smile, because he was very much the same when he cleared a dungeon for the very first time. Tang Yao, Yao Yao, Dark Mystery, Yulan, Blue Feather, and Bai Kaijui, Plain Boiled Water, were among the 8 people who leveled up. Meanwhile, Nian's experience bar had risen to 52%. As one could quite easily tell, the Treant King had given an ample and generous amount of experience. Nian dug through the pile of wood debris. Despite finding 2 pieces of equipment, they weren't the item he was looking for, so he continued his search. He brushed aside the branches and twigs and jolted in elation when a bright blue gem entered his vision. This is exactly what I was looking for. This gem was completely different from ordinary gems. Resembling a diamond, it was carved with many facets and blossomed with a dazzling radiance. He quickly appraised the gem with transcendent insight. Featherfall Jewel. A broken bar. It's the Featherfall Jewel. I finally have it in my hands. A broken bar. 2 pieces of equipment and a jewel dropped. One of them is a silver-grade hat for arcane mages, and the other is a silver-grade armor for paladins. As for the jewel, I'll be taking it for myself, Nian announced. Even if he wanted to take the equipment, he wouldn't have to pay money. However, the other members had to pay the rest of the team with their bid if they wanted the equipment. At this moment, not a single person raised any objections. The arcane mage hat went to Dusk for the low price of 1 silver and 50 coppers. Thanks to this, he didn't come out of the trip empty-handed. The paladin armor was taken away by Yulan for 2 silvers. Since many of the members were part of her team, and its value was divided evenly, most of the money stayed with her team and she only had to pay Dusk, Tang Yao, and Nian a few coppers. What kind of jewel is that? Share the properties with me, Dusk asked. He was rather curious about the jewel in Nian's hands. After all, the only reason the latter ran this specialist dungeon was for the sake of this jewel. Nian shared the Featherfall jewel's properties. Featherfall jewel, dark gold, ornament. Level requirement, 0. Properties, defense 8/10, strength +7. Can be equipped with the accessory slot or embedded into jewelry slot where applicable. Featherfall, activate to allow the player to fall like a feather through the air. Duration, 3 minutes. Weight, 1 pound. User restriction, can be equipped by all factions. Excluding rings, necklaces, and medallions, every player had 5 slots which players could equip accessories. Nian equipped the Featherfall jewel into one of his accessory slots. So it was dark gold accessory. No wonder you cared about it so much, Dusk exclaimed in surprise. The properties on this Featherfall jewel weren't that great, but its Featherfall ability was quite rare, otherwise it wouldn't be classified as a dark gold grade. Through this entire run, even if they were to add up all the equipment they received up till now, it still wouldn't be equal in value to the equipment Nian obtained for himself. Some team members felt this was a little unfair, however, they quickly erased this thought and quickly got over it. Without Nian, let alone clearing this specialist dungeon, they wouldn't have even obtained a single hair. How much honor points did your team receive? Nian glanced at Yulan and asked. Around 1200. Thank you. Yulan looked at Nian and sincerely thanked him. So much? Even when my team cleared Black Flame Forest, we only received 800. Dusk exclaimed in fright. He began to think specialist difficulty truly wasn't simple. This was merely tree and forest. If they were to run Black Flame Forest or Agmota Muddy Swamplands on specialist, he'd imagine the rewards would definitely be much more generous. You guys can head to Black Flame Forest or the Fallen Shaman camp now. If you haven't gone to those dungeons before, you should take some time to prepare, Nian said. Will you come with us? Yao Yao gazed at Nian and asked. Yulan and the rest also perked their ears up while waiting for Nian's reply. However, Yulan also understood her team's little temple wasn't big enough for a deity such as Nian to stay in. Nian faintly smiled and said, like I said before, I won't be following you geese to Black Flame Forest. He definitely wouldn't have a pleasant time running a dungeon together with a person like Chenbo. However, if Yulan and the others kicked Chenbo out of the team, he would think it over. Even then, it was simply thinking it over. He'd have to check whether he had the free time. Oh, our broken bar. Yao Yao felt somewhat disappointed. In a few days, Brother Ni is going with us to run the Agmota Muddy Swamplands, Dusk interjected. He was now thoroughly convinced of Nian's ability. Being able to run another dungeon with this expert was truly a wonderful matter for him. Tang Yao gazed at Nian with expectation in his eyes. He wanted Nian to bring him along as well. Nian sent a whisper to Tang Yao. Air skills aren't there yet. Agmota Muddy Swamplands has very high requirements for mages. You can practice by following Yulan and her group for now. Then when you're good enough, I'll bring you along on the harder dungeon runs. You'll right, I understand. Tang Yao nodded his head. Nian wouldn't lie to him. If he did tag along for the Agmota Muddy Swamplands and couldn't keep up, he'd likely lose face for Nian. He calmed himself before resolving to run a few more dungeons with Yulan and her team. That way he could polish up his skills. How about letting Tang Yao tag along with you guys for Black Flame and the Fallen Shaman camp? As for those dungeons, I can give you guys a bit of advice, Nian suggested. Yulan nodded her head and said, we're extremely glad to have him. From now on, he'll be part of our team. Tang Yao's magic damage was quite high. His contributions in this run were great as well. For this kind of person to be willing to stay on their team, she couldn't be any happier. Moreover, with Tang Yao here, Nian would definitely give them some advice instead of keeping it from them. With the item distribution finished, besides the Uncanny Dodge skill book, the Forest Necklace, and the Featherfall jewel, Nian also received 3 silvers. Meanwhile, Tang Yao earned his first large profit and received roughly 60 coppers. Is there anything we still need to do? Dusk asked. Return the flute to Einpat, Nian replied. He glanced at Bai Kaijui, plain boiled water, and said, Hand the flute to me. At the end of the day, the flute was a quest item and never belonged to him in the first place. Bai Kaijui inwardly sighed and handed the flute back to Nian. Nian eyed the forest thickets and spotted the decrepit old man walking unsteadily towards them. Respected senior, we've punished those despicable dark elves and retrieved your flute. Good. Yes, this is indeed my flute. Thank you, brave adventurers. There'll be no need to navigate the winding and twisting paths on your return. I'll send you all to the exit myself. May the divine bless you. Had Nian and the others tried to keep the flute, they would have incurred Einpat's wrath and likely found themselves in a perilous situation. Ultimately the giant forest would have become a resting place for their bones. 8S System. Side quest: Einpat's missing flute has been completed. You have received 28,596 experience points. A. Shortly after Nian received this notification, a thick fog emerged and enveloped the team. The elderly Einpat disappeared as well. When the fog finally dissipated and everyone could see clearly again, they discovered they had been returned to the entrance of the forest. We can still collect another reward by going to the commander in Kalor. Nian glanced at his experience bar. Among his teammates, he received the largest share of the experience because he had contributed the most during Einpat's quest. Moreover, after gaining the experience from the side quest, his experience bar rose to 73%. Everyone was in high spirits. It truly felt great following Nian into a dungeon. After receiving the reward, their experience bars once again rose by a large chunk. A broken bar. After traveling back to Telak Town, the entire team took the transport point to Kalor. Upon arriving, Nian headed directly for the barracks. Their destination was to the southwest of the city. When they arrived at the outer perimeter of the barracks, they saw tall walls with many sentries posted atop. Overall, it appeared the defenses and security of this place were fairly tight. Nian and his group didn't enter the barracks but rather the lofty white tower that stood beside. This was the building where Commander Kavrot was stationed. As they entered, the group could see there weren't many NPCs within the building. However, a tall middle-aged man with a face full of scars and wore the military uniform of the Viridian Empire still walked over to greet them. Nian used transcendent insight to examine this NPC. Commander Kavrot. Youngsters, what business do you have coming to this place? Lord Commander, we caught 2 dark elves lurking inside Giant Forest. After interrogating them, we received some information that concerns the safety of Hilton Stronghold. Here are the heads of the 2 dark elves we caught. Commander Kavrot followed up with a few more questions while Nian answered accordingly in the formal manner which was standard in player-to-NPC interaction. Afterward, he handed the dark elf heads over to Commander Kavrot. 8S System. Side quest: deliver the information has been completed. 8S System. Your influence in Hilton Stronghold has increased by 11. 8S System. Your influence in Kalor has increased by 11. 8S System. You have received 32,320 experience points. 8S System. You have learned fighting from Commander Kavrot. 8S System. You have gained +2 strength. 8S System. You have received 2 silvers. 8. Some hidden quests gave additional stats as quest rewards. Nian never expected this quest was one of them or to be so lucky as to receive 2 additional points in strength. Each member of the team received decent experience and money as rewards. Meanwhile, Nian's experience bar rose to 97%. As for the 2 silver he also received as a reward, they simply didn't count for much considering the amount of wealth he already possessed. Rather than grinding mobs, it seemed much easier to level up by doing quests. However, quests were divided into different levels. The higher the difficulty of the quest, the more experience points it would give. For example, relatively simple quests such as gathering animal furs would give very little experience as a reward. While in team quests, the rewards each individual received would be based on their own contribution in the quest. In the case of this quest as well as Einpat's, Nian had contributed the most, thus he received the most experience, while the other members received much less in comparison. Well, we've handed in the quest so I should probably get going now. Nian said to Yao Yao, Dark Mystery, and the others. What are you gonna do now after handing in the quest? Yao Yao asked. She was somewhat reluctant to part killing monsters and leveling up. However, where I'm going you guys are certainly unable to follow, Nian replied. Since he now had both the Featherfall Jewel and Ring of Woven Silk, there were many places he could try going to. Since he's busy, let's make our team and level up, Dusk suggested. With so many high damage mages on this team, it would be too much of waste if they separated now. Fatty over here has the meteor spell. It's got good area of effect and is decent at mobbing groups of monsters, so you probably won't be leveling slowly with him on the team, Nian suggested. He was planning to have Tang Yao familiarize himself with the others so he would no longer have to worry about not being able to find a team. After receiving numerous pointers from Nian over such a long period of time, Tang Yao's head skills soared in proficiency. Though he still couldn't be called an expert, he would have absolutely no problems assisting this team. After all, low-level dungeons and killing mobs generally weren't too challenging for an arcane mage. Meteor? Everyone was surprised. At this point in the game, mages who knew offensive area of effect spells could best be described as being as rare as a phoenix feather. Why didn't we see you use it earlier in the dungeon? Bai Kaijui asked. Using that skill in the dungeon? Do you think I'm looking to die? Before entering, Nian specifically warned him not to cast Meteor while in the dungeon. Tang Yao had taken this warning very seriously. Therefore he sounded quite blunt and forceful in his reply. Alright. How broken Bai Kaijui awkwardly smiled and scratched his head. Casting large area of effect spells would frequently alert many mobs and build up a lot of aggro at the same time. In such a case, the frontliners wouldn't be able to keep the monsters from getting to the backline. So it turns out he actually had Meteor. Why are we still wasting our time here? Dusk rubbed his hands together. He was getting a little impatient to see the might of the rare Meteor spell for himself. I'll be taking my leave first then, Nian said goodbye to everyone. Though after seeing Yao Yao's unhappy appearance, he laughed and said, next time, I'll kill monsters with you guys. How about it? Remember those words because you're not allowed go back on them. Yao Yao widened her eyes, sounding pleasantly surprised. Her bright and colorful smile was as dazzling as the sun. She didn't know why but she felt like she had known Nian for a very long time despite them only being acquainted for a few days. They seemed to have a sort of unusually familiarity and understanding with each other. Nian laughed and said, sure. After leaving the group, Nian began walking over to Kalor's auction house. Meanwhile, the others in the group gazed at Nian's departing back. Only when his figure disappeared into the crowded streets did they finally regain their senses. Come on, let's go and train. When Dusk saw Nian disappear into the crowd, he turned around and said, yeah, let's head out. As they departed the area, he sent a message to Sleepy Fox. Captain. Take a look at this video. You at kind of video? Just watch it, and you'll know. A broken bar. In the lesser werewolf spawn area near Telak Town, a group of players was in the middle of combat. At the front of the group amongst those players was Sleepy Fox. He turned to the warrior nearby and said, hold the line for a moment, before retreating from the fight. Alright. As he retreated, several spells whizzed past him and blasted the lesser werewolves behind him. He was currently in the middle of leveling. For Dusk to dare disturb him at this point in time, it would definitely be an important matter. He opened up the video and pressed play and was surprised to discover the person in this video was Nian. His interest was now piqued, thus, he continued to watch. While he observed Nian and the others killing the mobs, he furrowed his brows. This is Treant Forest, right? Why do the Treants have such high health? He was quite knowledgeable in the game. With but a glance, he was easily able to spot something strange about this video. They're running the dungeon on Specialist. Treant Forest on Specialist, a broken bar. Did you guys actually clear it? Sleepy Fox sent a message to Dusk. He was shocked, however, He soon regained his wits. Such crappy equipment and their team still dare to enter a specialist dungeon? Quite a rare sight indeed. We did clear it, 8-Dusk replied a moment later. His skills with the crossbow are amazing, Sleepy Fox exclaimed in admiration. He was on the part of the video where Nian first began luring the treants with the crossbow. Even if one had exceptional skills, accurately firing those 3 bolts in such a short time frame and under such pressure was nearly an impossible feat. Nian's skills were beyond exceptional. The players at present had just entered the game, so in regards to skill, they were a far distance away from Nian. These 3 bolts might be nothing more than a common everyday skill in his former timeline. However, in the eyes of Sleepy Fox, Dusk, and the others, it was no different from the skills of the god. Sleepy Fox had never valued or noticed the importance of a thief during a dungeon run. After all, many teams who lacked one still managed to clear dungeons just fine. Therefore he never attached any importance to what Nian could do as a thief when he invited him. Though at present, he began to think having a good thief in a dungeon expedition team was somewhat of a significant matter. He had always felt the team was lacking a certain something, yet only now did he realize what it was. What they were lacking was exactly an expert-level thief like Nian. 8-West tone was correct. He really is an expert, 8-Dusk said. Stone's judgment had always been somewhat lackluster, yet this time around a broken bar they didn't know how or what. Though a good analogy would probably be something like a disabled cat finding a dead mouse. But he somehow managed to invite a godly expert to their team. 8 You should be able to clear Agmo to muddy swamplands now. 8 After finishing the video, he understood the phrase, a successful thief can increase the team's survival by 30% or higher, slightly better. This line didn't only apply to 3-player parties nor only 5-player parties, it meant the same with 20-player and even 30-player teams as well. Besides his individual skill, Nian's leadership abilities were certainly commendable too. Were it not for him, Yulan and the others would have found it impossible to pass the dungeon because of their subpar equipment. The moment Nian found out Dusk was part of Holy Empire, he knew the progression of the run would be seen by Sleepy Fox. Therefore the least he could do was to eliminate some of the doubts in Sleepy Fox's mind. Now that the Featherfall jewel was in his hands, Nian was reminded of a famous elite monster, Gato the Lion King. He still needed to make quite a few preparations if he wanted to get rid of that overgrown feline. Nian took a stroll around the auction house. Since the demand and selling price of black phenol wasn't bad, many alchemists gathered whatever left-over ingredients they hadn't concocted it into black phenol to put up on the auction house. At the moment, there were a little over 100 bottles and several dozen recipes for sale. In but a few days, the value of these items would soar considerably. However, a few days hadn't arrived yet, so Nian pressed purchase without the slightest hesitation and cleaned the entire auction house out of all its black phenol recipes, and even the ingredients used to create black phenol. After purchasing all of the black phenol and black phenol related items, Nian sorted by price and bought 9 of the most expensive crossbow quivers up for sale, 2,000 black gold bolts, 3,000 nightmare bolts, and 4,000 tempered poison bolts. Black gold quiver, 1,000 bolts, damage plus 12, price, 2 silver. Nightmare quiver, 1,000 bolts, damage plus 10, price, 1 silver, 50 copper. Tempered poison quiver, 1,000 bolts, damage plus 9, price, 1 silver, 10 copper. These bolts cost Nian a pretty penny. Besides a few players from the larger guilds who were in charge of luring monsters, absolutely no one could bear to use these expensive bolts. Truthfully, even those wealthy guilds would find it a bit too wasteful squandering these bolts on luring monsters. Therefore the demand for these types of bolts wasn't much at all. However, Their prices still remained high because they were relatively uncommon. Hence only ridiculously rich players like Nian would purchase these things. After purchasing the quivers, Nian teleported to Mordor using the transport point and headed off in the direction of Violet Dream Hills. He went past the town walls and traveled north for roughly 10 or so kilometers before encountering an unbroken chain of mountains. Arriving at the base of one of these mountains, he ran up the path leading to the mountain peak. Upon reaching the peak, he gazed far into the distance and saw an open plain. Due to how high up he was, everything on this plain looked extremely small. He then looked at the landscape directly beneath him, which was nothing but desolate terrain. Standing atop the peak where the wind whistled through the air, he observed the forest of conifers that ran along the mountain range. The trees flowed like the waves in an ocean of green. The peak he stood atop of was roughly several hundred meters above ground. For the average player, it would mean certain death if they tried to jump off this peak. Nian paced back and forth around the peak, occasionally glancing down to examine the landscape directly below. However, he halted upon finding a certain tree situated near the peak's edge. He stood directly under this tree and faced east. 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. A broken bar. This should roughly be it. Yep. It's right here. There's no mistaking it. Nian then leapt off the mountain peak. Though his actions stated otherwise, the purpose of making this trip really wasn't so he could commit suicide. It was because the lair of the level 7 elite monster, Gato the Lion King, was located beneath this cliffside. This monster was the field boss who ruled over this desolate terrain, and many unsuspecting players who came to this area to train would find themselves killed by this mighty lion. Gato would respawn within a day if he was killed. Moreover, he had a high probability of dropping the black blood set, which consisted of 3 items: cloak, gloves, and shoulder guards. At level 5 silver grade, the set was currently the best thief equipment sets in the game, coming second to the Covenant set, which could only be found in the yet-to-be-opened Sozal Valley dungeon. By obtaining the black blood set, Nian could at least guarantee that he was fully geared in first-rate equipment. Beside the aforementioned set, Gato also dropped various thief skill books. In Nian's previous life, many players gathered here to hunt Gato the Lion King. Plenty of chaotic battles occurred for the sake of snatching the equipment he dropped. Oftentimes a large expanse of players covered the entire area, so wanting to grab the black blood set wasn't a simple matter, while trying to complete the set was even more of an ordeal. This was due to the fact that Gato would also spawn several hundred lions with him each time he respawned. Therefore players needed to clear the surroundings of lions before facing off against the boss safely. However, the numerous ordinary level 7 lions were extremely difficult to deal with as well. The player base at present was too low level. At the very least, it would take 25 level 5 or higher players to hunt Gato. However, those sort of players were few and far between. Moreover, those who were at that level were certainly experts as well. In any case, gathering so many top-ranked players together certainly wouldn't be easy. Let alone Gato, players didn't even dare to come to this area to hunt the ordinary lions. This vicinity was a level 7 monster spawn area, so very few people would come. Even if they did, none of them would be able to reach the Gato's lair. This was the reason Nian could feel at ease while carrying out his plan. The wind blew past his hair as he continued descending in altitude. When Nian reached 4/5 of the way to the ground, he activated the Featherfall Jewel's skill, whereupon he immediately began slowing down. He felt like he was as light as a feather as his speed slowed down to a steady rate. Under the effect of Featherfall, Nian's falling speed was only somewhat faster than the actual falling speed of a feather. The distance between him and the ground grew increasingly short. He estimated his current altitude at about 20 meters above ground. He shot out a web line from his ring of woven silk which stuck to the rock face and stopped his fall. Now suspended in the middle of the air, he looked below to discover a robust brown lion with a large mane of hair and an imposing royal aura. By coincidence, this lion was also within his firing range. Obviously, This was Gato the Lion King. Nian recalled this was the exact location where he spawned. Perfect. The web line connected to Nian's left hand was firmly secured on the vegetation growing on the rock wall above. His right hand reached into his bag and took out a crossbow. He lined the sights on the lion. A broken bar. A tilde whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 8 tilde. The bolts shot out of the crossbow and went in a straight line towards Gato. Since the majority of the player base was too low level, very few players were able to reach this destination, which led Nian to believe his actions were far from prying eyes. However, unbeknownst to him, in an area not far from the cliff face he overhung, a group of 10 or so players were hunting mobs. The strongest among them reached level 6 while the lowest was level 4. Even their highest level member was still a level lower than these lions, thus none of them dared to penetrate too deeply into Violet Dream Hills. Although they received 300% bonus experience for killing these level 7 lions, it was offset by their numbers. Moreover, their expenditure was too great. In the game's current state, even a single basic health potion was an expensive luxury. Yet they were consuming these potions at a ludicrous rate. Were it not for the fact that their profits were somewhat decent after recently picking up a Leo shield and a few fur pelts, they would have long stopped hunting these high-health hard-to-chew monsters. Bladelite, let's leave after another hour or two. We should have enough lion pelts by then, said the priest to the level 6 fighter at the front of the group. The fighter named Bladelite raised his shield and blocked an incoming lion's attack. Brandishing his sword, he countered with heroic strike and kited the lion as the mages whittled its health away. Once its health fell below a certain point, he finished it off with whirlwind slash. Alright, we'll leave in an hour then. Since we've already got a Leo shield, it'd be perfect if the Leo armor dropped as well. Resplendent Bladelite nodded and replied he and hurriedly collected the items that dropped from the monster's corpse. That's impossible. I read online that the drop rate for Leo armor is 1 in 500, said an elementalist who walked to his side. He and Resplendent Bladelite were the only level 6s in their team. His was named Haizuo, Black Amazing. The two of them could be counted as experts in the game. Although they were friends, neither was willing to admit they were weaker than the other. In terms of skill, Bladelite was superior, but Haizuo's influence in their guild was higher. Their guild was named Unhindered and was established using both of their names. Since Bladelite wasn't interested in the management aspects of the team or guild, Haizuo naturally took on this role. Under his leadership, not only did Unhindered become a successful guild, it became somewhat famous as well. What? The Leo shield's drop rate is only 1 in 1,000, yet we still managed to get one anyway. Bladelite rebuked. That's only cause you got luckier. Broken bar. Haizuo's complexion paled. Bladelite's tone made him somewhat speechless and angry. However, he still managed to mumble out a few words in reply. If I can equip the Leo armor, I'll have the highest defense out of any player in the game, Bladelite said in a confident tone. Egotistical pricker. Broken bar. Haizuo thought in disdain. His expression, however, did not betray his inner thoughts. He and Bladelite, on various occasions, competed in sparring matches in the arena, though the difference between them was clear. Out of 10 matches, it'd be considered amazing if he could even beat Bladelite in 2 of them. Bladelite was famous, quite skilled, and he was well respected among players in several professions. In truth, Unhindered was established solely on his reputation alone. Thus, Haizuo had no choice but to rely on Bladelite. However, as the guild continued to expand, Haizuo's authority over it grew as well. As a result, he was slowly inching out Bladelite in terms of position within the guild. As he and his team prepared to continue their hunt, Bladelite happened to gaze over at the distant cliff face and was surprised to discover a player jumping off its peak. Geez, a broken bar. I'm seeing stranger things by the day. People are even committing suicide in video games. Can't this guy be a little less morbid? However, to his astonishment, that players' falling speed continued to decrease, to the extent where they were unlikely to die even if they hit the ground. Guys, look at the cliff face over there, Bladelite exclaimed in an amazed manner. Why? Haizuo asked as he inadvertently looked to the side, whereupon his expression immediately froze. He also noticed Nian. At that moment, He saw Nian shoot out something from his hand and suspend himself in midair, whereupon he took out a crossbow and began firing below. What the heck is doing? The surrounding members stared blankly. Amazing, this guy can even think of a strategy like this. Haven't you guys figured it out? He's killing monsters. Bladelite straightened his back and replied. The player overhanging this cliff deeply interested him for being able to figure out such a unique method of killing mobs. This certainly wasn't an average player. That item on his hand should be the ring of woven silk. Haizao recognized this item because he was knowledgeable of most equipment in the game. If we also had this ring of woven silk, could we also be like him and hunt monsters like that? No, even if we had that ring, we still wouldn't be able to. Unless we have equipment with the feather fall ability like him, the force of the fall would likely snap the web line. Bladelite replied. The ring of woven silk was already quite a rare accessory that held considerable value. There was even less of a need to discuss equipment with the feather fall ability, which happened to be rarer. These two unique items couldn't necessarily be bought even if one did have the money. Yet for the sake of hunting monsters, this person obtained both. Just who the hell was he? Damn. I'd like to be able to kill monsters like that. If I never have to worry about being attacked while firing bolts, I'd be able to rise several levels in no time. Not necessarily, the number of mobs in his range is limited. His leveling speed won't be that high because the mobs don't respawn fast enough at the rate he's killing them. After clearing all the mobs in his range, he'll have no choice but to go back. A somewhat knowledgeable member of the team voiced their opinion. Haizao didn't utter a single word while listening to his teammates' discussion. They couldn't penetrate too deeply into the area because the nearer they approached that cliff, the higher the mob density. Since they didn't dare to get anywhere near that area, they would never know what sort of monsters that player was hunting. Roar! The deafening sound traveled all the way from the cliff face to where they were standing. The surrounding members paled as they all looked on in horror. A robust lion leapt 5 meters into the air and threw itself at the cliff face. The pounce was quite powerful and ferocious, even managing to shake the cliff face on impact. Yet no matter how high that lion leapt, it was far from being able to reach Nian. Its body halted on the cliff face and involuntarily slid off. All the while, Nian dangled calmly in midair and steadily fired more bolts. It's the elite class monster, Gato the Lion King. Haizao shouted, his voice cracking in astonishment. Each member of the group looked at each other in dismay and shock. Gato the Lion King, even if they were to form a 20-player team right now, they still wouldn't be able to kill this lion. Yet this level 7 elite class monster was currently being turned into a pincushion as it was slowly shot to death by a single player overhanging a cliff. When they thought of this, they felt resentment boiling up inside of them. Perhaps even more so a feeling of envy and jealousy. Can we rush in and steal the equipment from him after he kills it? One of the members asked. Impossible. We simply don't have any means of going there, unless guild leader Haizao can call a bunch of people over here. However, the losses we would suffer far outweigh our potential gains. Aha, broken bar, forget it then. As Bladelite, Haizao, and the others contemplated, the earth violently trembled. The vibrations they felt on the ground resembled a stampede. Each of their faces paled, and they quickly looked into the distance. What they saw was a giant dust cloud rising into the air and several hundred lions running in their direction. The Lion King's roar had stirred up the lions in the vicinity. We're done for. Everyone, retreat immediately. Haizao shouted in alarm, but it was already too late. The stampede of lions had discovered their presence. At that moment, they were simply awaiting their impending doom. Bladelite realized how difficult it would be to escape, so he raised his shield to welcome the enemies. Meanwhile, the perpetrator of this disaster was hanging leisurely over the cliff face. He didn't need to expend much strength. All he needed to do was steadily fire his crossbow. The bolts that were fired all had the additional property of dealing bonus on hit damage. Even if it was the level 7 Lion King, it still had no more than 5 or 6,000 health. Under his steady fire, it soon had less than half of its health remaining. The Lion King's aggro was fully on Nian, but it was incapable of attacking him. Thus, there was nothing it could do. Since it only knew physical attacks, All of its abilities were related to raising its physical damage. Even when it leapt at its highest, it only reached 6 or 7 meters while its opponent was suspended 20 meters in the air. Killing monsters that surpassed him in level became much simpler with these bolts that dealt bonus on hit damage. Each and every bolt would deal real and genuine damage. Nian specifically chose this location after making certain the Lion King didn't have any ranged attacks. Gato was the boss that resided at this cliff base, and Nian recalled there were at least 10 other monsters like him. However, Gato happened to be the easiest one to deal with because it only knew physical attacks. Naturally, Nian would choose to challenge the pushover over the others. The Lion King tried every which way to get its claws on Nian. However, as time elapsed, its health eventually fell below 20%, and it entered a berserk state. Its robust and muscular body, though weakened, suddenly filled with energy and unyieldingly pounced at Nian. However, no matter how hard it struggled, all of its efforts were futile in the end. Before another half hour even passed, its health bar fell empty. The Lion King raised its head to the sky and resentfully roared, unwilling to resign to its fate, before collapsing onto the earth. Gato the Lion King, the boss that would be fought over by numerous players in the future, had its life ended just like that. Nian hadn't lost a single drop of health in the process of whittling it to death. Eating. A clear melody rang into the air. He received 800% bonus experience for killing a monster that surpassed him in level. After hitting level 5, his experience bar continued filling up and only stopped upon hitting 36%. The Lion King had dropped 2 pieces of equipment. Both items lay sparkling on the ground beside Gato's corpse. Equipment dropped. Excitement arose within Nian. However, he still couldn't come down. He could see 10 or so lions still roaming around in an area not far from Gato's corpse. In order to retrieve the dropped items safely, he needed to clear them out first. Thus, he continued firing the crossbow until each lion was shot to death. Unlike other games, dropped items never disappeared after a certain amount of time. The game resembled real life, as in items thrown on the ground would never just disappear out of thin air. As for items players didn't need or couldn't sell, they could be broken down into raw materials by the recycler to recoup some of their value. Seeing as there were no monsters left in the area, Nian released our web line and dropped to the ground. After falling 20 meters, he only lost 60 health. This sort of height wasn't enough to kill him with full damage. Nian walked up to the Lion King's side and collected the 2 pieces of equipment that dropped. Since both items were unappraised, he revealed their properties with transcendent insight. Black Blood Cloak, Gold. Level requirement, 5. Properties, Defense 19A21, Resilience +5, MOF. Speed +6. Weight, 2 pounds. User restriction, Thief can be equipped by all factions. Lion King's Shield, Gold. Level requirement, 5. Properties, Defense 39A51, Block Chance +12%, Resilience +5, Magic Resist +7. Weight, 10 pounds. User restriction, Fighter, Paladin can be equipped by all factions. Nian felt quite satisfied when he saw that a piece of equipment from the Black Blood set had dropped, though he didn't expect the Lion King's shield to drop as well. Its value was much higher than the Black Blood Cloak. To illustrate a point, if he brought it to the marketplace, he absolutely wouldn't sell it for anything less than 20 silvers. In the best case scenario, he could exchange it for a couple pieces of thief equipment. The price for a fighter's shield remained high in the marketplace, always occupying the top positions in terms of price. Out of the 10 most expensive equipment sold in the marketplace, 8 were fighter shields. What a good piece of equipment! Along with the Black Blood Cloak, I've made a decent profit. Nian stored the shield and cloak into his bag. I'm finally level 5. Broken bar. Nian glanced at his stat page. Due to the Chapter of Courage's effect, he gained 2 additional stat points and 1 additional skill point upon reaching level 5, meaning he had a total of 7 stat points and 2 skill points to allocate. He allocated 2 points in strength and 5 in dexterity. Since intermediate marksman couldn't be improved any further at his current level, he distributed his 2 skill points into dagger and dual wielding. As a result, He gained a 10% attack bonus along with increased proficiency in wielding daggers. Moreover, he could at long last dual-wield weapons. Nian brought out all the level 5 equipment he had been carrying with him just for this occasion. After switching out all his level 0 equipment, he glanced at his character info. Main weapon, horn dagger, bronze. Secondary weapon, assassin's decree, gold. Armor, headhunter's silver leather armor, silver. Cape, black blood cloak, gold. Boots, boots of swiftness, gold. Nian's upgraded equipment drastically changed his appearance. The headhunter's silver leather armor, with its dull silver-white luster, gave off a chilly aura of slaughter and death. From his back hung a dark, blood-red cloak that emitted a faint golden glow. In addition, the pair of daggers he held in his hands flickered with a cold glint. The style of thief equipment was generally reserved compared to other professions, and Nian had also concealed the equipment's visual effects. But from a quick glimpse, one could still discern that his equipment was out of the ordinary. Nian became much faster with his level 5 equipment. He moved like the wind, leaving after images behind him. Not bad, he muttered to himself. He felt quite satisfied with his new equipment. In this period of time where good equipment was still scarce, his own equipment would cause the overwhelming majority of players to look at him in admiration. This new equipment would enable him to freely roam around any level 6 or 7 monster area as he pleased. Nian would need to wait a day for Gato to respawn, so he began heading out of Violet Dream Hills. His next objective was the level 8 elite class monster Ogre Devourer, who resided in an area not far from this one. The loot the Ogre Devourer dropped was also rather decent, as it dropped items for every profession. In his past life, there was even a player who'd obtained a piece of dark gold thief equipment. Of course, the drop rate for equipment of this grade was extremely low. The Ogre Devourer was also a monster that took a day to respawn. Nian made sure to carefully avoid the lions as he left the area. Moving forward, he heard a rustling sound coming from a nearby bush. Nian looked over just in time to see a fighter clad in white armor with an ashen silver great shield in his hand leap out of the bush and come running in his direction. Just moments later, 3 lions also emerged from the bush and pounced after the fighter. That fighter's footsteps were steady and unhurried. However, his situation was a little unfavorable, as his health was running low and the lion's attacks became increasingly ferocious. Intimidate. The fighter's sudden and explosive roar startled the lions and halted their movements for a brief moment. Taking advantage of the small opening, he followed with tendon break and targeted the closest of the 3 lions before rapidly pulling back. The lion struck by tendon break temporarily entered a crippled state. The 2 other lions fiercely growled and leapt into the air, pouncing on the fighter. The fighter retaliated with heroic strike, striking one of the lions and repelling it. He then firmly raised his shield to meet the other lion's attack. Even for a level 6 fighter, it was still quite difficult to deal with 3 level 7 lions while low on health. Nian had activated stealth the moment the fighter appeared and blended in the background. Instead of leaving, he idled around the fighter. If Nian were to take advantage of the situation and act, the fighter would undoubtedly die. However, he still held some reservations. Judging by the other party's firm and collected movements, he could tell with a single glance they were an expert. He was currently contemplating whether it was worth becoming enemies with this expert over a single piece of equipment. In the end, he decided it was best to wait for the 3 lions to kill this expert first. After all, when 2 sides fought, it would always be the third party that benefited the most. As for saving this person, Nian had no interest in such an idea. He had been in too many situations where the person he saved repaid his kindness with malice. In this world, everyone fought for their own interests, so it was necessary for him to learn how to be cold-hearted. Since this person dared to come to this area, they were presumably not weak. Nian examined this fighter with transcendent insight. Resplendent Blade Elite, level 6 fighter. Nian's raised an eyebrow after reading this player's name. He knew almost all the players who rose to fame in Kalor, even if they held just a little bit of reputation. Naturally, this Resplendent Blade Elite was no exception. How could it be Hema Broken Bar? Nian muttered to himself, though he had no dealings with Resplendent Blade-Elite, he still recognized this name because it was quite influential in his past life. Blade-Elite held impressive renown as he stood amongst the top 3 fighters in the game. That said, the rankings were an inadequate indicator of their strength due to the minuscule gap between him and his 2 rivals. This made it near impossible for others to determine who truly reigned supreme. Therefore, despite not being the absolute strongest, Blade-Elite was still a celebrity Nian had heard of. Now that Nian thought about it, he seemed to recall there was a story surrounding Resplendent Blade-Elite. It was about one of his friends, an elementalist named Haizao, Black Amazing. The two, who jointly established a guild named Unhindered, were considered the closest of friends. However, Blade-Elite didn't care much for managing Unhindered, so full authority over the guild eventually fell to Haizao. Later on, Blade-Elite found out his girlfriend was having an affair with Haizao while he, of course, had absolutely no clue this had been occurring. He was a proud and arrogant person, so how could he bear this sort of humiliation? In retaliation, he brought many of his brothers away and left the guild. From then on, Unhindered separated into 2 factions with irreconcilable differences. As for what happened after a broken bar, Blade-Elite could be considered a hero of sorts. He kept to his promises, valued loyalty, and was well respected among other players. Moreover, no one disputed his position as one of the top 3 fighters in the game. Hence, without Blade-Elite, Unhindered went on a continual decline and eventually degenerated into a second-rate guild. As Blade-Elite resisted the 3 lions, he felt a cold chill run down his spine and a peculiar sensation arose in his heart. He steadily retreated as he fought, occasionally glancing behind to look around, yet he saw nothing but empty space. However, his instincts would never betray him. He knew this odd feeling came from the gaze of a thief. Even with 6 points in awareness, he was still unable to locate the other party's position. This isn't an ordinary thief, brother. Since you're already here, why don't you show yourself? My name is Resplendent Blade-Elite. If you've decided to attack, I won't attempt to struggle since I'm done for in any case. However, if you're willing to save me, you'll have my thanks. In addition, I'll even swear on my name that I'll remember this favor. Blade-Elite spoke in a clear tone. At the same moment, the lion that had been left behind recovered from its crippled state and joined back with its 2 companions. All 3 pounced forward and intensified their assault. I didn't think he'd be able to notice me. Nian pondered for a short while. He would only obtain a single piece of equipment if he killed Blade-Elite. The equipment he'd acquire wasn't for his profession and its value wasn't something he highly regarded. In contrast, being owed a favor by a first-class fighter held much greater appeal than a single piece of equipment. Moreover, from his previous life, he knew Blade-Elite was known for being a trustworthy person. The lights and shadows in the background blurred, followed by a figure emerging into sight roughly 3 meters from Blade-Elite. Nian had emerged. He lowered his body and swiftly struck one of the lions with a sweeping kick. Concussive strike. The blade of his daggers flashed with a cold glint. Among the 3 lions, the one he struck with concussive strike was low on health. Nian chained his prior attack with assassinate followed by vital strike and instantly killed the lion, whereupon he drew back immediately and pulled out a crossbow. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 bolts shot out of the crossbow and pierced the air. Put. A'37, A'38, A'32. Nian's attacks caused the 2 remaining lions to switch aggro. They turned around and pounced on him. Taunt. Blade-Elite knew that this moment, his best course of action was to support Nian. His taunt came at just the right time. The lions stiffened mid-pounce and the aggro switched back to him. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Nian fired his crossbow once more and 3 bolts shot through the air. Put. The lion that was already low on health from being struck earlier died after the second round of bolts. Nian withdrew his crossbow and pounced toward the remaining lion. Cleave. Bladelite leapt high into the air and struck the remaining lion. The attack ensured its attention was fixated fully on him while Nian circled round its back and released a flurry of attacks. A'52, A'50, A'51. Thieves dealt 30% more damage when attacking an enemy from behind. A brief moment later, the lion went limp and collapsed to the ground. Bladelite felt a mix of shock and relief when he saw Nian's nimble movements and high damage. What a strong thief! Just a moment ago, if he had decided to attack me instead, I'd have zero chance of survival. Nian walked up to the 3 lion corpses and searched around. To his disappointment, nothing had dropped. Well, that's settled. Too bad nothing dropped. Anyway, if you plan on keeping your promise, this means you owe me one now. My name is Nian, Nirvana Flame, Nian said, examining Bladelite. He appeared to be near his mid-20s. He also looked mature and rugged, giving off the impression of someone who could be relied on and trusted. I, resplendent Bladelite, am a man of my word. I'll remember this favor. In the future, just call if you need me. As long as it's within my capabilities, I'll do my best to lend a helping hand. Bladelite replied in a straightforward manner. He wasn't the type of person who backed out on his promises. Bladelite then glanced at Nian's face and was shocked at his immature appearance. He never thought this thief would be so young. He only looked to be 18 or 19 years old. Moreover, he didn't think Nian would appear in this area for no rhyme or reason. Presumably, the player he had seen earlier, suspended over the cliff face and shooting the Lion King, was Nian. Why did you come here all by yourself? Nian asked. It was quite dangerous for a lone fighter to burst into a high-level monster area. Thieves might not have a problem coming here, but that was only because they could avoid danger by activating stealth. I entered this area in a party with my friends, but we got separated when we met a large group of lions. I'm the only one remaining, everyone else died. I was constantly fending off those lions and there was never a chance for me to use a return scroll. If it weren't for my high health and defense, I would have likely died as well. Bladelite replied in a calm manner. However, Nian could imagine how bitter and desperate of a situation he had been in. I guess you're lucky then. You're right. I am pretty lucky for being able to somehow survive. How about we add each other as friends? Resplendent Bladelite is too much of a mouthful. You can just call me Bladelite. Nian accepted Bladelite's friend request. His new friend was a powerful fighter, which was worth being happy over. At least from now on, he'd no longer have to worry about finding a good tank when running a dungeon. This isn't a safe place for you to idle around. It's best for you to hurry up and return to town, Nian suggested. If a pride of lions were to catch sight of them, he could still easily escape, but Bladelite was different. He had no way to hide himself. Moreover, with his large build and bulky equipment, he'd likely become a free meal for the lions in this area. For Bladelite, these words weren't pleasant to the ears, but he had no means to refute them. Besides the fact Nian seemed to be much stronger than him, fighters couldn't compete with thieves when it came down to survivability. Alright then, I'll leave. I owe you a favor, so if you ever need me just send a message. As long as it's within my capabilities, I'll try my best to help. Bladelite nodded his head and retrieved return scroll from his bag. It really wasn't safe for him to stay here for too long. Wait a second, Nian shouted, stopping Bladelite just when he prepared to activate the scroll. His impression of Bladelite was quite good. What's the matter? I have a shield that you might want. I don't mind selling it to you if you can give me a decent price, Nian said. It would be too much of a pity selling this shield through the auction house. If an acquaintance could afford it, he might as well sell it to that acquaintance instead. Either way, by selling the shield, he'd have more money to do other things. Huh? Let me take a look at it. Bladelite seemed quite interested. Nian was the person who suspended himself over the cliff face to kill the Lion King. To be able to use such an ingenious method of hunting a boss, he was certain to have good equipment. Nian placed the Lion King's shield inside the trade window. This shield should be worth over 20 silvers, but I don't mind selling it for only 20. Teeth. Is a broken bar dropped from the Lion King when you killed it? Bladelite was left shaken after examining the shield's properties. He couldn't even begin to imagine how much better the Lion King's shield was in comparison to his own. In fact, there really was no comparison. The two weren't even on the same level. Nian furrowed his brows. How did Bladelite know he killed the Lion King? Seeing Nian's reaction, Bladelite hurriedly explained, "Oh, my apologies. It seems I got a bit too excited. However, you can rest assured that I won't leak this information." Then, he returned his gaze to the shield. "This Lion King's shield really is worth over 20 silvers. If it were to appear in the marketplace, it definitely wouldn't sell for less than 25 silvers. Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of money on me right now. Would you be willing to wait for me to scrape up enough funds after returning to the city?" "Sure, I can wait," Nian replied, nodding his head. "Oh, I also have a few pieces of thief equipment in my personal storage. Several of them are pretty decent, and some of them should hold your interest. Would you be interested in exchanging them in place of money?" Bladelite asked. "As long as I can use them, I'm fine with it," Nian replied. He had actually been worrying about being unable to find good thief equipment, so Bladelite's suggestion came at the perfect moment. "Ah, all right then. I'll contact you after I collect the money. Please don't sell the shield to anyone before then." Bladelite felt tense and anxious as he stared the Lion King's shield in Nian's hand. Nian thought for a moment before he replied, "I'll wait a day. If you're not able to raise enough money by then, I can only look elsewhere to sell." Out of the people he had frequent contact with, only Bai Kaijui, plain boiled water from Mulan's Blue Feather team was a fighter. However, it was highly unlikely, if not impossible, that Bai Kaijui could afford the 20 silvers he wanted for the shield. Nian felt a little hesitant, putting the shield up in the auction house. He'd much rather keep the fertile waters flowing in his own fields. After all, it was more beneficial to give such equipment to his acquaintances rather than strangers. "One day is enough," Bladelite promptly replied. He was a straightforward person and didn't haggle over the shield's price because he understood he had already received a great bargain. Normally, if it was sold to someone else, such a shield wouldn't sell for any bid less than 25 silvers. For it to sell for 30 silvers or higher was a reasonable albeit unlikely possibility as well. Nevertheless, 20 silvers was still a significant sum. "Haha, Broken Bar, seems that I'll have to borrow some money." Filled with excitement and anticipation, Bladelite activated the return scroll so he could raise the funds he needed in the city. "Oh, there's one other matter." "Is Haizao Black Amazing your friend?" Nian asked. After thinking it over, he still felt it was best to warn Bladelite. The type of people he detested the most were two-faced backstabbers. Haizao and Bladelite were friends, yet the former still chose to have an affair with the latter's girlfriend. This sort of behavior a broken Barney Yan truly found it condemnable. "Yes, he is." "How did you know?" Bladelite asked, a hint of bewilderment mixed in his tone. "I've heard many unpleasant rumors surrounding what kind of person he is. A little incident happened between him and one of my friends. My friend met him and a woman called Zia, beautiful Angelica, at Midnight Charm at Kalor, and they got into a scuffle." Nian glimpsed at Bladelite's expression. In his previous life, this bar was where Bladelite discovered his girlfriend and Haizao were committing acts of adultery. Nian didn't mind exposing Haizao's deeds at an earlier date. Sure enough, after listening to Nian's words, Bladelite's complexion slightly paled. Xian was his girlfriend whom he met online. Later on, they met each other in real life and had been living together since. If she and Haizao really were committing indecent acts within the game, it would truly be difficult for him to find out. Haizao and Xian were the most trusted people in his life. He didn't believe this was true. A broken bar, no, he wasn't willing to believe it could be true. Yet, deep in his heart, he felt a hint of uncertainty and restlessness. Could it be what he's saying is actually a broken bar? No, a broken bar. Bladelite shook his head. It's absolutely impossible. If I ever meet Haizao, it won't be on friendly terms. Of course, it'll have nothing to do with you. Nian was only warning him out of the kindness of his heart. Regardless, he wasn't the one being cuckolded. If there comes a day where you plan on leaving unhindered, Come and find me. I'd be happy to have you by my side. Nian said all that he wanted to say. He turned around and began walking into the distance. I'll never leave unhindered, Bladelite coldly replied. He convinced himself Nian was just another one of those people trying to poach members for their guild. Truthfully, Nian really did have the intention of recruiting him. After all, it would be a great boon for him to successfully pull Bladelite to his side. However, this little setback was of no matter. He had never hoped for immediate results. His goal was already accomplished. A seed of doubt had been planted deep within Bladelite's heart. Sooner or later, as it slowly germinated, he would one day at last a broken bar catch whiff of what was being done behind his back. And at that moment, once he realized his short-sightedness, he'd recall Nian's invitation. This much was enough. Nian didn't bother explaining. He activated stealth and disappeared from Bladelite's view. For a short while, Bladelite stood there in a daze. Eventually, he unfurled the return scroll and activated its magic within. A brilliant light flashed through the surroundings, and he was teleported away. Nian was currently dashing through Violet Dream Hills. At the base of a mountain in the distance, he could see an enormous tree several dozen meters in height. It would take at least 7 full-grown men to link their arms around this tree, and its immense treetop resembled a roof blocking out the sun. Such a landmark seemed especially lofty when placed within Violet Dream Hills. Surrounding this tree was a forest of smaller trees and vegetation. The ogre devourer he had been searching for was located here. A level 8 elite class monster. If he and it were to go head-to-head, he'd stand absolutely no chance. However, when it came to hunting monsters, he didn't necessarily need to face this ogre devourer in direct combat. The boss frequently roamed around the vicinity. Therefore there was no set position where it could be found. If one was unlucky or careless, they would end up encountering it by accident. Unlike the Gato the Lion King, the ogre devourer wasn't as well known, and the items it dropped were a bit worse. Add on the fact that its skin was coarse and thick while its health was high. Many players would find it very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, it possessed a skill named Petrifying Gaze which had the effect of paralysis. Average players were advised to keep as far away as possible if they encountered this boss. Nian neared the giant tree as he passed through some thickets. His cloaking stat wasn't low. Thus, once he hid in the background, even if he wasn't in stealth, he wouldn't be so easily discovered by monsters or players. The wind was surprisingly strong at the base of the mountain, and it carried the faint scent of blood. Amid the sounds of leaves rustling in the wind, Nian also heard distant footsteps. He hurriedly hid behind a nearby bush and looked towards the origin of the sound. Whereupon, an obese, 2-meter-tall, blue-skinned, two-headed ogre entered his vision. The ogre wielded a giant wooden club in its hand. Its movements were clumsy and its two heads were looking around endlessly. And only after a long while did they finally start walking again. With a single glance of its body, Nian could tell this wasn't the ogre devourer but merely a common ogre. Nian didn't have any interest in killing small fry. He took a detour around the ogre and continued his search. After exploring the area for what seemed like ages, he finally heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming from the depths of the forest. He could distinguish these ogres from the sound of their footsteps. The one approaching him definitely wasn't ordinary. Finally, a broken bar. The ogre devourer is coming. Nian dashed towards the immense tree at the end of the forest which was roughly 80 meters away. Near the large tree, there were 6 other smaller trees. They were also thick and sturdy. Roughly 2 grown men were required for their arms to surround a single tree. He decided on these several trees as the location for his ogre hunt. As he arrived near the source of the sound, which also happened to be in the direction of the immense tree, he gradually recalled the incident that prompted him to head to this area. Before he reincarnated, after the servers had been open for over 2 years, a level 5 thief single-handedly killed the level 8 elite class monster, Ogre Devourer. Despite the player base having outgrown this boss, such an unprecedented event had still caused quite a stir. An enormous figure entered Nian's sight after 10 or so seconds. It stood at an evident twofold the height of an ordinary ogre while it spanned a much greater width. This was the Ogre Devourer. Nian hid behind a tree with one of his knees on the ground. He retrieved his crossbow, holding it up with his left hand while his right gripped the trigger. He gazed forward and aligned the crossbow sight with his target. A level 5 thief had killed the ogre devourer with a crossbow by chipping away its health. Nian had to admit a broken bar. That person must have been quite courageous. Nonetheless, if they were to compare, Nian wouldn't lose to this thief. In any aspect there was absolutely no doubt he too could accomplish this feat. After all, he was one of the few players who received the title of Shadow Dancer. He reckoned the other Shadow Dancers in his era could do the same. Nian had a thorough understanding of the process used to whittle the ogre devourer to its death. Nevertheless, the execution was still going to be a challenge. In his past life, that thief had killed the boss without a hitch, but his success was partially attributed to luck. Through the sight, the figure of the ogre devourer drew increasingly near. Nian redirected his aim to a certain area on the boss to its weak point, the heart. He held his finger on the trigger and prepared to launch a few bolts. However, out of nowhere, two common ogres entered his line of sight. They were roaming in the vicinity of the boss. Nian stopped himself from pulling his trigger finger and paused for a moment. Though there was a sudden introduction of two unknown variables, whether they could influence the success of his plan remained to be seen. The ogres are big and clumsy. I should be fine as long as I don't get hit a broken bar. That said, it still isn't an easy task to shave their health down without receiving any damage. Raising his crossbow once more, Nian took aim at the ogre devourer. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With the pull of the trigger, 3 bolts shot out, aimed directly at the devourer's heart. The 3 bolts whistled in the air. Put. As if the bolts had struck thick bark, hard muffled sounds rang out. Ogre devourer, elite, level 8, health, 6,000. Although this boss didn't deal as much damage as the others, it made up for it with high health and thick skin. Either way, the ogre devourer certainly wasn't easy pickings. Due to its strong defense, Norman crossbow bolts dealt limited damage. Nian's current attack only enabled him to deal 2 to 3 points of damage at most using normal bolts. Fortunately, he had bought those special bolts which dealt on hit true damage. One of those bolts would take out at least 15 health, which was quite impressive. The ogre devourer turned around in the direction of its assailant. It lumbered forward and moved towards Nian while brandishing its large wooden club. The devourer's heavy 5-ton body resembled a humanoid fortress as each of its steps caused tremors in the earth. Seeing that he had successfully aggroed the boss, Nian dashed towards a nearby tree and chose a path with denser vegetation. The ogre devourer was awkward and clumsy, and it seemed as if it were running slowly due to its large build. However, its large strides covered quite a bit of distance, and it was actually closing the gap as it chased Nian. The other 2 ogres could also be seen following the ogre devourer from the rear, though it soon became apparent that they weren't going to catch up. They continued trailing further and further behind. After running for about 50 meters, Nian degrowed the ogre devourer because it wasn't able to catch him. It turned around and looked as if it wanted to depart. However, Nian turned around and shot 3 more bolts at it before dashing off again. After being attacked again, the ogre devourer regrowed onto Nian and chased him with renewed zeal. While running, Nian noticed only the devourer was chasing him. The other 2 ogres had long stopped chasing and were now wandering around in a distant area. I guess my luck isn't bad. It'll be much easier dealing with the ogre devourer alone. The boss gradually closed the distance, and only 20 meters separated them. As it chased Nian, the ogre devourer began emanating a dangerous aura. Its 4 eyes suddenly turned red, and its body radiated a scorching light like a cartoon bomb on the verge of exploding. The 2 pairs of eyes locked onto Nian. Petrifying gaze. Nian felt his chest tighten when he noticed the ogre devourer's abnormal behavior. These types of monsters that could lock the player down were especially terrifying. If one were careless for just a moment, that player would find themselves unable to even budge an inch. In the same moment the ogre devourer used petrifying gaze, Nian rolled out of the way and ducked behind a tree. Miss. The ogre devourer roared in anger when it failed to hit its target. It strode forward and covered a large distance with each step while it charged at Nian. The 2 ogres behind it were also alerted. However, after only a few meters, They turned around and began wandering around again. Nian sucked in a deep breath of air while he hid behind the tree. The information he previously read in a guide was correct. After attacking the ogre devourer twice, it would use petrifying gaze 6 seconds later. If a player was struck, they would become frozen for 6 seconds, incapable of any movement. At present, the only method of dodging petrifying gaze was to get behind cover before the skill activated. Furthermore, the player couldn't be a second late. In the event that the skill hit Nian, the ogre devourer would have caught up and smashed him to death with its giant wooden club. This was the reason why it was considered extremely difficult soloing the ogre devourer. Not just anyone could accomplish this task. Even long after the video of it being killed had been published, it still remained as one of the toughest early game bosses to contend against. 8 Yush, whoosh, whoosh. 8 Nian fired another round of bolts. He nimbly traversed between the trees and fired the crossbow from time to time. 8 Air crash. A broken bar crash. A broken bar crash. The ogre devourer continued brandishing its club. Each swing proved fruitless since trees were all they struck. The key point in killing this boss revolved around making sporadic movements while traversing past obstacles. Although its running speed wasn't slow in spite of its immense size, it was rather lacking in agility. An excellent thief could take advantage of this weakness by circling around several large trees, making it so that the ogre devourer would miss its attacks. However, this strategy was not one that could be pulled off well by anyone. If the player lacked spatial awareness, couldn't properly judge the ogre devourer's movements, or carelessly got hit by petrifying gaze, they'd likely be sending their lives to the boss. In order to avoid being caught, the player had to always run in a curve and never in a straight line. They also couldn't stop moving for more than 3 seconds. With so many years of combat experience supporting him, many actions became instinctive and ingrained on the deepest level, enabling him to easily fire the crossbow while smoothly navigating the terrain. Seeing as the ogre devourer wasn't too difficult to deal with, Nian felt much more relaxed. His nimble body weaved between the large trees while he fired the crossbow between the gaps. The boss had no way of dealing with Nian. Unable to figure out how to catch him, its two heads turned in every direction, eventually getting dizzy and confused. With top-quality gear and 10 years of experience, if he couldn't even match that level 5 thief in his past life, he shouldn't have even bothered playing this game. 8 put. 8 The bolts nailed themselves into the ogre devourer's skin. Its health was gradually being chipped away as it repeatedly roared and brandished its club, smashing it at Nian. 8 Air crash. The club smacked the large tree. Nian had leapt backwards and avoided the attack. It was unable to harm even a single hair on his body. 8 Yush, whoosh, whoosh. 8 Another 3 bolts pinned themselves on the ogre devourer, eliciting furious roars that brought over 2 normal ogres. Now this was a bit troubling. Nian glimpsed at the ogre devourer's health bar. Only a third remained after 30 minutes. If he put aside this sub-elite monster to deal with the normal ogres, its health would return to full, and his work would go to waste. Whatever, finish it off first. Nian accelerated his rate of fire as the 2 normal ogres joined into the battlefield. The pressure he felt rose precipitously. There was no end to the 3 monsters' pursuit. They made attempts to surround and kill him, but they underestimated his agility. He was as slippery as a loach through the gaps between several large trees. He shot bolts that seemingly came from nowhere. An enraged roar came from the ogre devourer's throat, and it swung its enormous club at Nian, but the swipe could not reach him. The 2 normal ogres weren't of any help to the ogre devourer either due to Nian's meticulous pathing. Not only that, they even became obstructions. Every time it attempted to move, there were 2 ogres blocking its way like brainless pigs. Nian was unperturbed by his perilous surroundings. When he prepared to fire another round of bolts between the trees with one knee on the ground, the ogre devourer's eyes suddenly emitted another dark red light. Shit, its petrifying gaze again. Nian put away his crossbow and rolled under the cover of the trees. Miss. Nian now had a greater understanding of petrifying gaze after successfully avoiding the skill 3 times, so he'd be able to dodge so long as he hid behind a tree when it started casting. Before he even found his footing, however, a massive shadow loomed from above. An ogre had circled behind Nian, avoiding his detection entirely, and its enormous club strewn with nails smashed down. Nian didn't have the slightest thought of staying still. He threw himself forward, out of the club's range of attack. 8-E boom. 8-. The impact left a small pit and sent fragments of stone and dirt into the air. Nian had no issues imagining his fate if he had delayed by even a second. The knockback effect from the ogre devourer's attack would have sent him flying. Disastrous consequences would occur during the 2 seconds it'd take to travel through the air, fall to the ground, and climb back up. Nian regained his stability, but much to his surprise, he had been surrounded by the 3 ogres during that time. With their clubs raised high into the air, the ogre devourer and 2 normal ogres approached steadily. "I'm done for." It seems that this is the end of the line. Such an accident was beyond his expectations. He swept his gaze over the surroundings. His path had been completely sealed by several large trees and the 3 ogres. There was no escape in sight. The ogre devourer bellowed and a deafening roar reverberated through the forest. It raised his club, then slammed it down at Nian. Within the blink of an eye, a spiked club covered his entire field of view while he could even see the individual nails embedded in the wood. Nian tried retreating, however. The 2 ogres flanked him from behind. His situation couldn't be any direr and his heart felt like it was going to burst out his chest. In the brief moments before his seemingly imminent demise, he happened to notice the branches in the tree above. They were roughly 8 meters from the ground and flourished with leaves of a vibrant green. However ordinary they were, they seemed like an extension of a holy tree. There. Nian leapt to the side, slipping away from the ogre devourer's club. He put full force into his legs and jumped, simultaneously shooting a line of webbing from the ring of woven silk. The power of his jump brought him 3 meters in the air, while the ring of woven silk ejected a line of webbing of roughly 5 meters length. The line of webbing shot through the gaps between the leaves and stuck on the branches. He was suspended in the air, but with a nearby foothold, he leapt up again and flew past the ogre devourer's head. 8-E boom, boom, boom. 8-. 3 clubs smashed onto Nian's position, sending dirt and pebbles scattering into the air. However, no blood nor flesh stained the ground. All 3 ogres' attacks struck naught but air and earth. Their dazed expressions revealed their confusion. Upon landing, Nian bolted to build up some distance. He stopped between 2 trees and knelt, with his right hand supporting the crossbow and his left finger over the trigger. He shot 3 bolts. 8-E put. 8-. Although the ogre devourer had briefly lost its target, the oncoming attack prompted it to turn its head towards Nian, whereupon it raised its club and charged. Contrary to expectations, Nian did not stop shooting, even when the ogre devourer had approached. Seeing as the enormous club was about to crush him, Nian didn't dare to hesitate. He rolled to the side and evaded the ogre devourer's attack. Its health had already been dropping quickly, and since Nian now intensified his assault, the ogre devourer would soon fall. Only 40 or so health remained. Nian circled to the ogre devourer's back and withdrew his crossbow. He unsheathed his dagger and pounced at this sub-elite monster. Vital strike. Lacerate. Taking advantage of the few moments the ogre devourer took to turn its head, Nian's dagger left deep gashes on its back and scarlet blood stained the air and earth. Nian's new set of equipment raised his attack significantly. In addition to the extra 30% given to a thief when striking monsters from the back, he dealt fairly impressive damage. As it felt a sharp pain shoot up from its back, the ogre devourer waved its club and let out a miserable roar. Due to his honed reflexes, Nian ducked his head as he could sense an object quickly flying towards his head. 8-E boom. 8-. A giant club swiped over his head, only missing by a hair's breadth. Phew. Too close. He raised his dagger and struck the ogre devourer's chest with assassinate. At last, the final sliver of its health dwindled away. A short stagger, Then its colossal figure collapsed. 8 tilde bang. 8 tilde dust rose into the air and gently floated amidst the thunderous noise. From the side, the two remaining ogres charged towards Nian. He quickly fished the items from the ogre devourer's corpse and backed away swiftly before he retrieved his crossbow and fired rapidly while darting between the trees. The normal ogre's strengths weren't all that noteworthy, nor were their health points even close to the ogre devourer's. So, when facing the assault of Nian's fire, they both fell to the ground in quick succession. The party of ogres was now dead, finally allowing Nian a brief respite. Another field boss down. If it weren't for such an ingenious method of killing monsters, there was absolutely no chance Nian, with such a great disparity in levels, could have challenged that sub-elite monster and come out alive. This was the culmination of countless players' knowledge. In his past life, he glanced at his experience bar. It had risen greatly once again. The ogre devourer had thick skin, high health, strong attacks, and a special ability, petrifying gaze. As a result of all those factors, the experience it was naturally a generous amount. By killing the ogre devourer, Nian received a tenfold experience bonus as a reward. His experience bar rose by 37%, and he was now level 5 with nearly 3/4 of his experience bar filled. Nian had only killed one elite monster and one sub-elite monster, Agato the Lion King and the Ogre Devourer respectively, yet the amount of experience other players obtained after grinding for several days could not even come close to what he received from those two monsters. His level was rising like a rocket. One would never feel greater satisfaction in grinding normal monsters than killing elite monsters levels above themselves. Unfortunately, there were quite few elite creatures that could be killed by using terrain bugs or special techniques, and since elite monsters had quite a long respawn rate, Nian could only take this slowly. Nian would have to wait until tomorrow for Gato the Lion King and the Ogre Devourer to respawn. As for leveling, his speed was already sufficiently quick, so there was no need to grind normal monsters. With the time remaining, he could do some small businesses on the side. The Ogre Devourer dropped a total of 2 items, both of which were rather decent. Crossbow of Blood, Gold, Single-handed Crossbow. Level requirement, 5. Properties, Attack plus 11, 10% armor-piercing effect, Triple shot. Shooting speed, 16, Deviation 3%. Limitation, none. Staff of Moonlight Worship, Gold. Level requirement, 5. Properties, Attack 32A38, Level 3 Holy Explosion. 20% extra damage against demons. Limitation, Holy Mages can only be equipped by a member of the Righteous faction. Nian had challenged the high-level elites alone and had successfully defeated them despite the level gap. As such, the chances of receiving additional drops were multiplied unreasonably. The system's rewards were especially munificent. Nian had acquired 4 gold-tier equipment by now, and every single piece was extraordinary. The Crossbow of Blood particularly. It brought a great surprise to him. The 10% armor-piercing effect was fairly decent when compared to such a substantially superior crossbow. The one in Nian's current possession was of such a poor quality there was absolutely no need to hesitate in switching. When comparing goods, there would always be one inferior. The crossbow bought from the NPC had finished its quest. It had served well, and its times of glory had now come to an end. Thus, Nian equipped the Crossbow of Blood. As for the old one, it should still fetch some money on the auction. It had a price tag of 37 copper coins when he bought it, so its resale value should be some dozen copper coins. Nian returned to Kalor, having finished examining the new equipment he acquired. There were quite a few people within the city, but the vast majority of players had gone outside for leveling. The streets were bustling with people, many of whom were visiting Jaden's shop, the high-level alchemist, on the corner. All players who exhausted their stock of potions when leveling outside had to replenish their supply at that place. The auction house that sat in the heart of the city teemed with an even greater number of people. On the nearby streets, many players laid out their booths, and once in a while, some eye-catching items would appear. Nian entered the auction house and sold off equipment he no longer had any use for. He also continued buying all available black phenol formulas, black phenol, and the ingredients required. He left nothing unbought. After the opening of the new instance tomorrow, many guilds would go and spearhead the investigation. They would discover, to their amazement, that all traces of the low-priced and relatively unknown black phenol had vanished. Alchemists would occasionally produce several bottles of black phenol, but they'd be bought before one even had time to blink. As for the black phenol Nian collected a broken bar, they became commodities worth being stockpiled. He could starve the marketplace and slowly rid himself of the black phenol and black phenol formulas bit by bit, thus inflating the prices. The larger the development into the new instance, the greater the player's need for black phenol, and the easier the prices would rise. He could start by first selling black phenol and its ingredients, then he'd sell the formula at the later stages. He could gather a large sum of wealth with a method like this. Other investment options would be considered only after earning the money, since he had spent quite a sum purchasing black phenol. As usual, Nian went over to several small towns to collect bat teeth. He sold them off and earned 30 or so silver coins. He even bought most of the bat teeth on the marketplace, and he was now waiting for players to continue grinding. When they came by more bat teeth, he would return. However, Nian felt slightly puzzled because he hadn't even bought a single bat teeth at Link Ord, as it was one of the larger sources of bat teeth. "Mr. Cade, these are the bat teeth you asked for." "Sir Nian, Nirvana Flame, I am grateful for your assistance." After Nian's influence in Kalor had been raised, the NPC started using honorifics with him. It was evident as Cade was much more amiable. He came out of Cade's store, the high-level blacksmith. Nian raised his head and saw a paladin with silver armor entering with a hammer in his hand. This person seemed a bit over 30 years old. He was very tall and a bit fat. He had quite a unique appearance. The paladin looked at Nian with a cautious gaze. They brushed past each other before the paladin walked into blacksmith Cade's store and went to chat with him. Nian recalled this person. He was the paladin who discovered the blacksmith quest in his past life here, the person who made over 10 gold coins. The person who truly discovered this bat teeth quest had arrived, increasing the total number who knew of this money-making method to 2. If there were 2 people simultaneously collecting bat teeth, one would raise the prices to increase competition. The opposing side would raise the prices as well, and it would turn into a repeated back-and-forth situation until the profits became marginal. The players would also begin to suspect whether the bat teeth held special uses and thus start holding onto them. Last time, there was a thief that followed Nian, and now, there were a total of 2 players buying bat teeth for high prices. That would elicit more suspicion, and soon, someone would follow that paladin and blacksmith Cade would be revealed. "I won't be making much profit off this quest any longer." But to Nian, Cade's bat teeth quest was now dispensable. He had already acquired a sufficient starting capital, and he also had many other methods of making money. This quest was not a necessity for him. Nian checked his total assets. There were over 60 silver coins in his bag, and there were also large amounts of black phenol, its ingredients, and the formulas, all of which were going to inflate exponentially in value. It was absolutely fine even if he lost this source of income. Without even realizing it, he arrived at the Alchemist Guild's entrance after finding his way through the crowd. His mind had been wandering about before a vendor disrupted his thoughts. High-level potion ingredients and a swift retreat skill book for thieves. "It's a pretty decent skill book. This brother here, would you like to have a look?" yelled the white-robed holy mage. He had laid out a booth at the Alchemist Guild's entrance, and when Nian passed by, his eyes brightened. He decided to draw attention to himself. The holy mage was a shrewd person. With a glimpse, he knew Nian's equipment wasn't common gear, and several of them were quite high quality. This skill book, Swift Retreat, was something good for early-level thieves. However, it went for a rather expensive price here. He demanded a silver. Obviously, it was tough to find a buyer for such a costly item. If it were put on the auction, he'd likely find someone, but he would only receive money, and there was even a fee. The reason he chose to set this booth here was because he wanted to trade this skill book for holy mage equipment. His chances were greatly increased while people were converging here to form groups for the new instance. Normal thieves simply couldn't afford to buy such a skill book. As a result, Even though he had been yelling for 20 minutes and there were thieves who came up to inquire the prices, they all shook their head as they departed. However, the holy mage couldn't help but call out for Nian since he appeared rather well off. Nian turned his head around and glanced at the holy mage, with an ash-black staff in his hand. He was clad in a white mage robe and seemed to be around 20 years of age. With his sharp judgment, Nian instantly recognized his equipment. The robe he wore was called the Holy Walker and the ash-black staff was the Wind of the Fallen Moon. Although these weren't the best equipment at this level, they were still rather decent. "You're pretty lucky." "Swift retreat dropped for you," Nian said, faintly smiling. "It was a very useful skill." "Yeah, my luck's always been good. I have a few friends who were grinding for several days at Holy Canyon, yet they haven't even gotten anything good. I, on the other hand, just grinded for 3 hours and this swift retreat dropped. Right now, one of these is even more expensive than a silver-tier equipment on the marketplace." Nian's response to the Holy Mage's advertisement immediately triggered this chatterbox. He was like a radio that had been turned on. "The Holy Apostles there have pretty decent drop rates. Have you and your friends gone to the Holy Monastery? Assuming your group cleared that instance, you ought to have more than just the Swift Retreat skill book on you." "I'm wondering, a broken bar, do you have the Desperate Strike skill book as well?" Nian asked in a casual tone. Since the other party had Swift Retreat, he might as well try to procure the other skill book he needed. Hearing Nian mention the Holy Monastery, the Holy Mage was momentarily dazed. He examined Nian from head to toe and shook his head. "No. We're far from being able to obtain a Desperate Strike skill book. We still haven't entered because the monsters there are too strong for us." "Friend, seeing as your equipment is good, I take it that you've cleared dungeons around that level before?" "No, I'm only slightly knowledgeable. I've never gone there myself." "Anyway, how much for the skill book?" Although he was disappointed that the other party didn't have a Desperate Strike skill book, obtaining Swift Retreat wasn't too bad either. The Holy Mage felt a little skeptical. Most players who wore such good equipment should have already been through every dungeon at least once. Moreover, as a thief player, how could Nian have not entered the Holy Monastery? The dungeon was practically brimming with all sorts of thief items, and it was a location all expert-level thieves visited at least once. "I'm looking to trade this skill book for equipment. Elementalist, Holy Mage, or Paladin equipment, any of those are fine," the Holy Mage replied. He believed that the Swift Retreat skill book was valuable enough for him to exchange for several pieces of equipment. Nian made an awkward expression. He had already thrown all the equipment he didn't need up on the auction house. The only equipment he had right now was the Staff of Moonlight Worship, but he didn't know if Yao Yao, Dark Mystery, wanted it or not. "I can still sell to you directly if you don't have equipment." "Give me an offer, my friend. If it's reasonable, I'll sell it to you." "My name is Shenfa Wangxi, past destroying god." "First meetings might be distant, but second encounters will bring us closer. Even if our trade fails, I hope we'll remain on good terms." After observing Nian's actions, he noticed the other party's calm demeanor. He considered his own judgment to be decent, therefore he felt Nian was definitely an expert. Shenfa Wangxia broken bar? Of the people he knew, Nian vaguely recalled that he had heard of such a player in the past. Though only slightly famous, Shenfa Wangxi was known for having gotten into a conflict with Victorious Return at some point. He and his friends massacred several hundred members of their guild, only to vanish into thin air afterward. Alas, solo players who didn't have strong backings were destined to always be met with setbacks if they tried to take on a guild. Numerous players had suffered at the hands of Victorious Return, Nian himself being one such person, and perhaps because he felt they had experienced similar fates, he now held a more favorable impression of Shenfa Wangxi. At that point in time, Shenfa Wangxi's fame outstripped his by a great margin. He had chosen to fight, unlike Nian and his friends who had no choice but to hole up in the mountain ravines when they were being hunted by Victorious Return. "I'm Nian, Nirvana Flame. Since you want me to make an offer for the skill book, a broken bar, 1 silver and 50 coppers, how does that sound?" Nian was rather wealthy, so he could offer a high price without batting an eye. No matter how expensive the Swift Retreat skill book became, It certainly wouldn't be worth more than 1 silver and 50 coppers. That's too much. Even this skill book wouldn't be sold at such a high price. It's enough for you to just give me 1 silver. Shenfe Wangxi didn't shy away from Ni Yan's frank and straightforward attitude. Since the other side wanted to befriend him, why shouldn't he reciprocate? Inside the game, having another friend meant having another option, be it trading equipment or forming a team for a raid. Befriending a few more experts would make all these things much easier. How many people are in your group? Ni Yan asked. Since he needed a team to run dungeons, he'd eventually have to find some members to form one. Perhaps he could follow Shenfe Wangxi and his friends into a dungeon run. The game had just recently opened, so the number of players who had fixed teams were quite few. As for experts, they needed to carefully choose the right team before entering any instances. However, good teams were hard to come by. Thus, many of these players who were looking for teams were likely to group together to form one. Shenfe Wangxi's eyes brightened upon hearing Ni Yan's inquiry. You want to run a dungeon? I have 6 people on my side. They're all classmates from the same university and decently skilled. We have 5 players who are level 4 and 1 that's level 6, but he always runs dungeons with other people. However, he'll definitely come with us if we call him since we're all classmates. Our group is divided into 1 berserker, 3 mages, and 2 paladins. I might make a team, but I haven't made any plans for now. Depending on the circumstances, we'll see when the time comes, Ni Yan said with a light smile. Oh, our broken bar. Shenfe Wangxi felt slightly disappointed, but Ni Yan's answer made more sense after thinking about it. Forming a team wasn't an easy affair. Our equipment is more than a little lacking, so it'll be somewhat inconvenient for us to run the lower level dungeons just to improve our gear. Not to mention, with the way our group is composed, we often can't find a team to join. The equipment isn't a problem. How about this? When I find some more people in the future, I'll come looking for you guys. All right, Ni Yan replied, then sent a friend request to Shenfe Wangxi. No worries, just call me whenever you're ready. Hearing Ni Yan's promise, Shenfe Wangxi's heart was filled with expectation. Ni Yan felt if he wanted to continue developing in the future, it was a must that he secured his own team. While finding the right players was a troublesome matter, randomly picking people off the streets would often lead to mixed results. It would be a tragedy if he ended up recruiting a bottom feeder who didn't put in any effort and impeded the team instead. However, this sort of matter should be set aside for after he formed the team. In any case, even if they were bad eggs, all he needed to do was kick them. Since Shenfe Wangxi insisted, he didn't argue any further and bought the skill book for 1 silver. Swift retreat was an escape skill. In other words, it was a skill used in a situation where a player couldn't beat an opponent and chose to run, which was fairly common. Swift retreat increased a thief's movement speed by 30% for 1 minute when escaping, enabling them to quickly put some distance between their pursuers or even completely escape. Occasionally, such skills aided the player in avoiding a calamity. Ni Yan continued to chat with Shenfe Wangxi. In any case, he wasn't in a hurry to level because there were plenty of opportunities out there. It would only be a matter of time before he'd catch up with those top-ranked players. Where did you guys find so many medicinal plants? Ni Yan asked. He noticed that the majority of items for sale in Shenfe Wangxi's booth were plants. We can't help it. 3 of the members in our 5-player group learned the gatherer skill. We didn't really train much and picked herbs instead, Shenfe Wangxi replied and forced out a somewhat helpless smile. Ni Yan more or less understood what he meant. For players without a guild, if they didn't improve their gatherer skill or other side professions, they'd have a difficult time keeping up. Shenfe Wangxi being able to equip Holy Walker and Wind of the Fallen Moon meant he was doing well for himself. His equipment was even better than many players who joined guilds. Ni Yan pondered for a moment. He thought about the people he could call when he wanted to form his own team. There was Tang Yao, Shenfe Wangxi, and his 5 friends. As for a good fighter, he wasn't confident that Blade Elite would come. However, since he was selling the Lion King's shield to Blade Elite, the latter was certain to reciprocate this favor by giving him face. Perhaps he could call a few others to join as well. After that, he could recruit a few strangers to fill the remaining spots and form a passable team. No wonder you set up next to the Alchemist Guild's doorway. Nian laughed. Only alchemists would want so many medicinal ingredients. You keep on selling your things then. I'll be taking my leave. We'll talk some other time. Alright, Shenfa Wangxi replied. Just as Shenfa Wangxi, past destroying God, and Nian were saying their goodbyes, two players near the entrance of the Alchemist Guild erupted into a heated argument. One of the quarrelers, a young man who barely looked 20, wore plain cotton clothing and the Alchemist Guild's badge on his chest. His level was low, so most likely he was only at the apprentice rank in the Alchemist Guild. The other quarreler, an elementalist who looked to be in his 30s, wore equipment of much higher quality. Tall and robust, he dwarfed his opposition so much that he made the apprentice alchemist seem like a child. The failure in concocting isn't my fault this time. Not your fault? Then are you implying it's mine? Yes. They set me up to fail when I was concocting. Our captain provided you with so many ingredients, yet they were all turned into useless garbage by you. We can't even recoup our losses. I heard you got lucky and learned some sort of hidden skill. Good. Get lucky and scram out of my sight before I make you eat shit too. Obscenities and curses poured out of the elementalist's mouth. The moment he finished speaking, he slapped the apprentice alchemist in the face and knocked several alchemy tools and other items to the ground. The slap sent the apprentice alchemist tumbling down the guild entrance staircase. As he lay sprawled out on the ground, he lifted his head and hatefully glared at the elementalist. Ah, what the hell are you staring at? You got something to say? Keep staring and I'll make you eat the dirt even harder. Get lost. The elementalist's eyes bulged out of their sockets as he glared threateningly at the apprentice alchemist. The apprentice alchemist glanced at the elementalist once more. Eventually, he lowered his eyes and silently collected his tools off the floor. Bitch. The elementalist stamped on the apprentice alchemist's chest and knocked him back to the ground. The apprentice alchemist didn't retaliate. He remained taciturn, simply staggering back to his knees and continued picking up his things. A broken bar. Isn't he too much of a pushover? Even after being kicked, he didn't even make a sound. Shenfa Wangxi couldn't help voicing his opinion. The scene had left a bad taste in his mouth. The way he dealt with the situation isn't wrong. Right now, he probably has no choice but to endure. I believe by the time he rises in standing, it still won't necessarily be too late for him to retaliate, Nian said with a peculiar expression in his eye. Despite taking on the abuse, the determination still hadn't faded from the apprentice alchemist's eyes. Those who could patiently endure were especially terrifying. Shenfa Wangxi tilted his head back to look at Nian. The latter's words took him by surprise. Nian was likely someone similar to himself, a person who refused to be on the short end of the stick. If anyone were to offend him, then they would definitely be met with appropriate retaliation. However, Shenfa Wangxi suddenly saw Nian's expression change to pleasant surprise. He was gazing at the apprentice alchemist like he found some kind of treasure. So it was him, a broken bar. It really is true, be they enemies or friends, both are bound to be met on a narrow path. Nian muttered to himself in a low voice. He recognized this apprentice alchemist, but it wasn't because they were friends. No, rather they were enemies. If things stayed on course, this person would eventually become one of Victorious Return's most faithful dogs. In his original timeline, over a tenth of Victorious Return's various high-level potions, pills, tonics, and other drugs were concocted by this one person, several of which could only be concocted by him. Nian had suffered heavily due to the oppressive manpower Victorious Return possessed, but those vile concoctions were also one of the factors that led to his many defeats. While in the wilderness, he had once encountered a squadron of Victorious Return members. At that time, he was unaware those players were escorting this alchemist on a quest, and usually, he and his friends wouldn't be at a disadvantage when facing off against such a group. However, who could have imagined each and every one of those players would take out some crafty, eccentric pill that bolstered their combat power by many-fold. So, under the effects of those pills, he and his friends were beaten to a wretched state. The apprentice alchemist in front of his eyes was called Bird Leaves No Eggs. Owing to the fact that his name was unpleasant to the ears, because the bird in his name could also be read as penis. The members of Victorious Return didn't feel comfortable addressing him directly by name. Thus, they gave him the nickname of Medicine King. This title was rather suitable, considering the numerous contributions his concoctions brought to the guild. However, at this moment, Bird was merely an apprentice alchemist. He had just been kicked, both literally and figuratively, out of the Dark Hero Guild. In a month's time, Victorious Return would recruit and attach great importance to him due to their guild leader showing him kindness and recognizing his worth. This was the reason for his unwavering loyalty and dedication to the guild. In other words, he was a person who did have somewhat of a moral compass. Even if he's the Medicine King, he's only an apprentice alchemist right now. A broken bar. Whether he'll be worth the investment remains to be seen. Nian pondered for a while. Bird's success wouldn't have been possible without the Victorious Return's generous support. They had supplied him with an ample amount of alchemic ingredients and slowly nurtured him until he became the Medicine King in both title and ability, to the extent his name resounded throughout the entire Atlanta continent. After considering his current financial resources, Nian decided fostering the Medicine King absolutely wouldn't pose any problems. If he wished to succeed in the future, he needed to slowly build up his influence at present. He wanted to set up his own businesses in the game, an alchemy store, equipment shop, auction house. He couldn't be lacking in a single one. However, what he was in most urgent need of was talented people, and fortunately, an opportunity to recruit one such person had presented itself. He felt taking Bird under his wing would undoubtedly be the correct choice. The elementalist departed after abusing Bird a few more times, his mouth still spitting out obscenities as he walked away. While Bird picked up his tools, he lifted his head and coldly swept his gaze over the elementalist's back. A few moments later, a broken bar. "Hey, what was that elementalist's name?" Nian asked as he walked up to Bird's side. He slightly bent his knees and overlooked Bird, who was still tidying up the mess. "Razor." "Why does this concern you?" Bird glanced at Nian. "It concerns me because it concerns you." "Tell me, don't you feel humiliated? Don't you want revenge?" "However, you're powerless, and those without power are destined to walk down the path of being disdained by others. Follow me, and I can have them see you in a different light. I can make them regret ever offending you with today's actions." "Why should I trust you?" Bird replied in a suspicious tone. He raised his head and attentively stared at Nian. He couldn't comprehend Nian's sudden appearance. A stranger had just walked up to him and wanted to recruit him after a single exchange. Wasn't that a little too conspicuous and bizarre? "My intuition is telling me you're not some sort of useless waste. After being kicked out of your guild, you probably feel quite resentful, correct?" "Well, a broken bar. I just wanted to see if you had the determination and ability to confirm that assessment. Besides, you're broke and have nothing at all. From the moment I approached, I had nothing to gain in scamming you, no?" After Nian finished his speech, he turned around and began walking away. While he departed, he hiddenly anticipated the moment when Bird would run up from behind and catch up. If this was the Medicine King he knew from the past, then Bird absolutely wouldn't let this opportunity slip by once it presented itself in front of him. "Wait up." Nian faintly smiled. Bird had resolved himself when he saw Nian depart, his expression betraying the conflicting emotions in his heart. He had just been miserably humiliated and shunned by the Dark Hero Guild. This was a disgrace he would never forget. He held an extreme wariness towards Nian, because he wasn't completely clear on the latter's intentions. Moreover, the sudden appearance was rather odd. Despite this, one point remained certain: he was completely broke and penniless. Even his funds in real life were barely enough for him to live for 2 or 3 more months before being kicked out. Those who walked in bare feet didn't fear others in shoes. In other words, he had nothing to lose, so he wasn't afraid. So what if he was swindled? What other choice did he have? Belonging to the lowest rung of society, he was a cockroach who held the will to survive. As long as someone gave him a lifeline to hold on to, he would continue to live on. Bird struggled back onto his feet and followed Nian from behind. Shenfu Wangxi witnessed all the entire course of events while still sitting beside his items laid on the ground. He stared pensively at the receding silhouette of their backs and felt Nian's ambitions couldn't merely be satisfied by forming a team. However, this was good as well. There would be plenty of shade under a big tree. To elaborate, increased influence also came with increased benefits. A broken bar. What do you want me to do? Bird asked, while following Nian from behind. Besides concocting, there was nothing else he was good at. Even then, he would still end up messing up the simplest of recipes when creating medicines. He couldn't count how many materials he ended up squandering. If not, why else would he have been kicked from his guild? Naturally, it's still concocting. Out of curiosity, what was that hidden skill that elementalist mentioned? Nian asked, while continuing to walk. After successfully concocting a potion, pill, tonic, or other medicines, there's a 2% chance of strengthening its effects. Bird quickened his footsteps as he followed from behind. He didn't know why, but he had a strong premonition. From the moment he decided to chase after Nian, his destiny had subtly changed. As for what the future held, whether it was good or bad, he didn't know, but he was sure of one thing: a broken bar. He had already made his choice, and he was going to walk down the path he chose. My broken bar, not a bad hidden skill. But what use would it have for me? When I concoct pills, my success rate is only a third of those around me. If someone came looking for me to create a pill, potion, or whatever, it'd only be a fluke if I succeed. Since I took the effort to recruit you, naturally it means I believe in you. If you're willing to follow me, sign this agreement. Within the game world of conviction, any contract was valid as long as it was within the scope of the real world's laws. Bird suspiciously glanced at the contract in Nian's hands before taking it and carefully reading over its contents. As he slowly read the contract, word for word and line by line, he realized the clauses were rather simple. In layman's terms, Nian would provide him with the ingredients and materials required for him to train his alchemy. In exchange, jurisdiction over how his creations of pills, elixirs, tonics, potions, and so on were used would all be decided by Nian. Moreover, he would receive a 30% share if the sales of his concoctions produced a net profit. The conditions on this contract were roughly the same as the ones given by guilds when they recruited an alchemist. Although, he could see one key difference: the contract Nian presented him stated a 30% cut. In contrast, nearly every guild would only share 20% of the revenue at most, even if the alchemist was highly valued. In terms of benefits, Nian's conditions were much more generous than those guilds. However, nurturing an alchemist gave rise to enormous expenditures, all of which would be taken on by Nian. The number of responsibilities he needed to assume were staggering. This contract, a broken bar, you're really willing to let me sign it under these terms? Bird asked, his heart stirring with emotion. Even if you searched high and low, it would still be quite difficult to find such a generous contract. From the moment I learned alchemy to now, I've always been a failure in concocting. Why else would my guild have kicked me? Calculating the worth of all those medicinal ingredients I've destroyed to this day, it would probably reach 2 silvers at the very least. Please don't blame if you end up making a loss. Consider carefully. It's still not too late to renege on the contract. Bird presented the contract back to Nian, gesturing that he could take it back. As the piece of paper fluttered in his hands, he felt a mix of apprehension and anxiousness in his heart. What if Nian were to take back the contract? What would he do then? I'm not lacking in money. Even if I make a loss, then so be it. I know how to recognize my own faults. However, a broken bar, my insight has never been wrong. Rarely do I ever make mistakes when it comes to these things. Still, a broken bar isn't 30% too high of a price to pay for me? Bird's voice was lacking in confidence. Even in those guilds that paid well, their alchemists would still receive no more than 20%. It's already been decided. I believe you're worth the price, Nian replied, waving his hand and gesturing for Bird to hurry up. To gain Bird's absolute loyalty, it wouldn't do if he simply gave him money. No, he needed to have goodwill. and bolstering Bird's confidence and making him feel appreciated was a good place to start. Bird truly didn't understand just where Nian's trust in him came from. However, he could tell, from both actions and words, that Nian believed in his ability. When a person was at their lowest point and felt like a failure, what they needed the most wasn't anyone's pity, but rather only a single line of acknowledgement. Nian's words were unremarkable, his tone was normal, and there was no hidden meaning, yet they were able to bypass the guard Bird had raised and enter his heart. "All right." Bird paused for a moment to compose himself. "I'll sign the contract. I'm also fine with you lowering my share, but please don't blame me if you make a loss." Bird couldn't help but add the last clause as he answered. "Rest assured, even if you fail, I still won't blame or trouble you," Nian replied in a calm tone. After traveling back to the past, he had absolute confidence in himself, and he certainly wouldn't be short on money, be it inside the game or real life. The first opening month of the game was merely the starting point of when the real-world economy would connect to the in-game one. Roughly 2.5 weeks later, in-game property would be available to purchase or bid on. Shops, auction houses, land, and so on would all transform into privately owned entities. Various guilds backed by financial groups would certainly go into a bidding and buying frenzy for them. When real-world currency could be converted into in-game currency and vice versa, the value of these properties would skyrocket. The players would discover the shops they bought for tens, hundreds, or even thousands of gold would go for millions, possibly even tens of millions of credits. As for auction houses, even if you listed them up for 100 million credits, they would sell in an instant. This was the result of various large financial groups and adventure capitalists frantically investing in the scene. Nonetheless, owning a store or auction house truly would enable a player to reap enormous profits. By using his prophetic foresight, earning a profit certainly wouldn't be a problem. Why would he be afraid of raising an alchemist like Bird? Come the day this apprentice alchemist truly becomes the medicine king, his returns would be well worth the initial investment. The reason why his father met with failure after investing into conviction was because he had come too late. He had missed the opportunity to buy up in-game properties before the real-world economy and in-game one fully connected. By the time his father entered the scene, the large financial groups had already divided the game world's assets among themselves long ago and formed stable markets. When his father tried to forcefully enter, he was inevitably met with an iron plate known as the large financial groups. He entered conviction before his father did in order to lay out a path for him. Only then could his family avert the tragedy that befell them in his original timeline. The number of tasks he needed to complete in the first month before the real-world economy connected were many. He needed to amass a lot of wealth, and he needed to coax others to join him so he could increase his influence. In the future, the properties he would need under his banner included equipment shops, alchemy shops, auction houses, banks, large amounts of land, and general stores. Although he possessed the enormous advantage of being from the future, he still understood the logic that a lone tree could only support so much. What did this world need the most? Talent. And in front of his eyes was one such talent. He had stolen Victorious Return's future Medicine King from right under their noses, and he was now fostering their Medicine King under his own banner. Weakening your enemy's strength while simultaneously increasing your own. Why would he possibly not do this? The sole reason he became Bird's benefactor was because he wanted the latter's loyalty and dedication. After receiving Nian's unconditional trust, Bird couldn't deny that he wasn't at least somewhat swayed. He silently made his resolve. Come hell or high water, he would dedicate himself to Nian in order to live up to that trust. He had been similar to a drowning person, in desperate need of a lifeline. The lifeline happened to be someone's acknowledgement, and Nian happened to be the person who threw it. As for why Nian would go out of his way to recruit him or trust in his ability so much, he didn't know. Though, he felt this was fine, because those questions no longer mattered to him. Bird grabbed hold of the game-generated pen and scribbled his signature on the contract. Hereafter, all of Bird's crafting profession-related expenses would be recorded by the system and covered by Nian. In the event Bird violated his contract, he would have to pay an exorbitant fee. However, If Nian voluntarily chose to null the contract on his own, he wouldn't receive a single penny from Bird. "Follow me," Nian said before directly heading to the auction house. Following Nian from behind, he still had no clue as to what fate had in store for him. Am I really suitable as an alchemist to Broken Bar? He wondered. In the future, if he still remained a failure, would Nian tell him to pack it up and go? All these questions were like a riddle that lingered in his mind. The expenses required to improve the alchemy skill were immense. Would Nian really be able to provide him with the necessary supplies? A Broken Bar. Two people, one in the front and the other in the back, entered the auction house. "As long as you concentrate on concocting, I'll be satisfied. Let me prepare a few ingredients and materials to start you off. If you run out, feel free to send me a message at any time," Nian said. As they walked down the auction house's halls, he turned on his bidding device. Nian began to sort through the prices of the goods and bought 4 bags in a row. "Why did you buy so many bags?" "How could I not? An alchemist's bag is too small." "They're for me, a Broken Bar?" Bird asked in surprised tone. Out of the guild leaders he had met in the past, not a single one was willing to purchase these bags for their alchemists. The only times these guild leaders would go out of their way to purchase various gifts were when the alchemist was extraordinary or was in danger of being snatched away by others. "Who else would I be giving them to?" Nian replied in a matter-of-fact tone. He also purchased an entire set of wares for concocting. They were of a higher quality and possessed the additional property of increasing success rate when concocting by 5%. The price for the set cost him 3 silvers. Apart from the set of wares, he also purchased a large quantity of medicinal plants and recipes. Bird witnessed Nian purchase one item after another, and all them were for him. Besides being surprised, he couldn't help but feel touched as well. He had good reason to be surprised too. Nian was actually so wealthy. He felt truly fortunate to have found a backer with such a large capital. The reason he felt touched was because Nian had spent so much money for his sake. This boss of his was definitely worthy of his admiration and respect. However, at the same time, a certain question popped up in his head. Was Nian certain that he had the ability to return a profit? Nian had a large sum of wealth in his pockets. He could use it to rapidly nurture Bird into the Medicine King. In the coming years, a high-level alchemist would become as precious as gold. Many of them would be valued at upwards of 100 million credits. The Medicine King in his original timeline had a worth in the several hundred millions, and out of all alchemists, he was ranked number 3. Considering his financial strength, he didn't believe he wouldn't be able to nurture Bird into the Medicine King. Nian's act of generosity proved effective at persuading this apprentice alchemist's heart, though the unbridled manner in which he spent his money held a much more devious purpose. The further he invested, the further Bird would become irrevocably bound to his ship, thus making it all the more difficult to leave. In the event Bird truly wanted to get off, he'd have to pay an exorbitant price to do so. And considering his financial situation, trying to break away was basically impossible. In other words, Nian had accomplished another one of his objectives. By the end of his shopping spree, he had bought Bird 10 silvers worth of alchemy recipes and a vast quantity of ingredients and materials, filling all 5 bags completely. "Here, use these supplies for now. Even when I'm not around, focus hard on raising your skill," Nian said. These alchemical ingredients were sufficient to last Bird a long time. Seeing the bags packed to the brim with various plants and recipes, Bird couldn't help feeling emotionally moved. No matter how much of an idiot he believed himself to be, he could tell these ingredients were more than enough for him to rank up to a junior alchemist. After being expelled from the Dark Hero Guild, his experiences with Nian felt like being pulled out of the depths of hell and placed into heaven. There were even several times where he believed this was all simply a dream. "For showing me such kindness, a Broken Bar, I don't really know how I could ever repay you. So for now, I'll simply say thanks," Bird said, his voice trembling in gratitude. "Enough of that. These lines are getting too cheesy. It's not like I recruited you solely from the kindness of my heart. There was a purpose as well. As long as you're able to become an alchemy master or even grand master and earn me more money, that'll be the best way to repay me," Nian replied, waving him to stop. he couldn't help but ponder over a certain problem. After returning to the past, this was the first time he significantly changed history. Without the victorious return support in this timeline, would Bird still be able to become a Grandmaster Alchemist? At the moment, he couldn't be sure since there wasn't a clear answer. He could only try his best to make it happen. After all, every investment held their risks. Now that everything's settled, go and improve your alchemy. I still have a lot of other business to attend to. Gotcha, boss. I'll be excusing myself then, Bird answered. If he failed to attain any results even after spending so much of Nian's money, he simply wouldn't have the face to show himself again. From being kicked from his guild to being picked up by a stranger, an ember of hope and a certain desire had arisen from the ashes of his despair. Thus, he felt nothing but grateful towards this savior of his. He expressed his gratitude once more and took his leave. A broken bar. Nian paused for a moment and began to ponder. Such a chance encounter was analogous to having picked up a gem off the streets. Even if Bird couldn't reach the Grandmaster level in the future, only reaching the Master level wouldn't be too much of a loss either. He planned to slowly gather a few people to serve his purpose in the future. Medicine King Bird from his original timeline had become the first among these individuals he successfully recruited. After returning to the past, he was filled with wild ambition, establishing his own elite team, acquiring an alchemy shop, recruiting a master tailor or a broken bar. There were many things he wished to do. Perhaps one day, he would even be able to establish his own guild. He might not interact alongside them all the time, but there were other methods to manage the guild as well. By using his knowledge of the game and future events, he could still develop his elite forces from afar. Many mysterious and wondrous new areas would be released in future patches. Included, of course, would be new dungeons, crafting materials, and other items as well. Furthermore, there would be intense struggles over strongholds and enormous guild wars beyond the scope of one's imagination. Even cities, provinces, or entire nations could get involved in these virtual battlefields. In the previous timeline, countless financial firms across the globe had established their presence within the game. The potential commerce and booming economy within the game left many of these firms watering at their mouths. These major figures were itching to get the biggest slice while dividing up this enormous cake. They opened stores, established guilds, took over cities, and even became the powerful lords reigning over their regions. Armed with the knowledge of the future, he was absolutely unwilling to be resigned to surviving in the cracks and crevices these numerous figures overlooked. Therefore he required his own power and influence in order to contend against them. He might not have any significant influence at present, but do remember, great oaks grew from the smallest of acorns, and even the tallest skyscrapers were built from the ground up. The foundations to realizing his wild ambitions were already steadily being built. He withdrew from his daydreaming and began thinking of more immediate matters. No matter what the future held, his most urgent goal at present was still to hurry up and get strong. He worked hard to recall the locations of the several other chapters from the Book of Order. As he quietly deliberated over the problem of acquiring the other chapters, he also began wondering which ones were attainable at his current level. However, after a brief moment, he reluctantly decided that it was best to abandon such thoughts. All chapters were protected by a guardian of order. Were he to even attempt to retrieve another chapter in the hopes of surviving and succeeding, his actions could only be accurately described as foolishly throwing his life away. A few days ago, prior to his decision in retrieving the chapter of courage, he didn't have much to lose. He didn't have any valuable equipment on him, and at worst, he'd only drop a level. However, even he didn't expect himself to succeed in the end, as he had only gone in with a try-and-see attitude. Moreover, the reason he succeeded had a lot to do with the chapter of courage's location, a closed ravine by the mountainside. They were natural barriers he could cross over and take advantage of, and the ravine itself was near a town. The other chapters certainly weren't located in such convenient places. At the same time, he now held the chapter of courage on him. If he were to go and retrieve the other chapters and somehow met with an accident, he'd lose that as well. The risks compared to the rewards were simply too high. From the moment he entered the game to up until now, he had never played with the intention of leveling up at the fastest possible pace. Yet, he still managed to amass quite a few good things: the ring of woven silk, the featherfall jewel, the chapter of courage, and numerous skills and stat points. These things represented the strength that he had slowly built up for himself and would allow him to walk even further in the future. What else can I do? Diverting his train of thought, he began to recall of something else. The chapters from the Book of Order might be the sacred objects of those who guarded order. However, for thieves, there was another item that was heavily coveted: a pair of legendary grade boots called Sulgata's Shadow. If he were to equip a piece of legendary grade equipment, he'd imagine his stats would be high enough to frighten others. Unfortunately, in the distant past during the Sulgata War, these boots were damaged and separated into 3 pieces, which were scattered across the Viridian Empire. Only by retrieving and assembling these 3 pieces together could this legendary item be restored to its original form. One of the pieces of Sulgata's Shadow was located in an area not far from Kalor. The area was an ancient city that became swallowed by marshland. Sulgata City, though abandoned, survived from the distant dark era to the present. The ancient city of Sulgata broken bar tsk, what a troublesome area, he muttered to himself. In the previous timeline, he had been to this location before, but by that time, the piece had long been taken. Over the course of centuries, the city had transformed into an extremely queer place. The respawn rate and density of the monsters there were high as well, and trying to enter without a team certainly wouldn't be a simple matter. However, for a thief, it wasn't necessarily an impossible feat. Perhaps he would be able to secretly enter. Legendary grade equipment were truly too difficult to collect. Simply having an opportunity to retrieve Sulgata's Shadow, if only a part of it, was an extremely valuable thing, and he wasn't willing to let it slip by. Since after some time, he couldn't say for sure that there wasn't already a guild preparing to storm the city. I should give it a try. Who knows? I might actually succeed in collecting all the pieces. Before departure, he purchased a few consumables that he deemed necessary for this trip before leaving through Kalor's west gates and teleporting to the surface. After reaching solid ground, he traveled to his destination, passed through a patch of wilderness where the warm sunlight shone down on the abundant vegetation which blanketed everything in green. Passing through the wilderness, he eventually encountered an open plain. After traversing through for about 10 minutes, he turned around and gazed east, looking off into the horizon. There, he could see Kalor, with its enormous walls and pearly white buildings, suspended high in the azure sky and over the open fields. Above the highest buildings, above the city itself, he saw a hovering ring of light revolving in the air. Under the illumination of the mid-afternoon sun, the ring shone with a dazzling splendor. This indestructible, impenetrable city in the sky represented the Viridian Empire's greatest achievement in architecture. The Viridian mages, with all their wisdom and matchless abundance in mana, had controlled powerful magic beyond imagination to prop this imposing city into the sky, where it would stay suspended for past and future generations. Going by foot is too slow. How long will it take for me to start riding a horse? It'd be so much faster and more comfortable. However, Nian knew it would actually take over 2 months for horses to become commonplace as a method of transportation. They were simply too expensive. At present, even the lousiest of breeds still cost upwards of 10 gold or more. It just wasn't worth it. He retrieved a basic haste scroll from his bag and activated it by crumpling it in his hand, before sprinting off towards Sulgata. If there were players nearby, they would see a silhouette dashing across the open field, quickly disappearing into the distance. Half an hour later, he encountered a new area as the surroundings transitioned into a dark marshland. This location was far from town, so few players could be seen hunting here. Almost no one actively sought out this strange place that was inherently filled with danger. However, every so often, a rare bunch would take the initiative in exploring this marsh. Many of them were thrill seekers who happened to be high-level experts as well. On the road here, he had encountered many such players traveling in groups. Short stubby bushes flourished all over. A dense fog lingered in the air and blocked the sunlight from above. While every so often, a cold wind blew past, the marsh left an eerie impression on those who came across it. The earth was muddied and filled with basins of festering waters, where the occasional corpse of some unlucky animal could be found rotting inside. A slight rustle or movement periodically came from within the shrubs, as one or two snake-type monsters slithered by. All sorts of hidden dangers were lurking inside this dark marsh. 8S System, you've discovered Natlan Marsh. 8. I'm finally here. He examined the everlasting fog of the Natlan Marsh. Passing through this area will take a bit of effort. He cautiously moved between the bushes, wary of the potential monsters lurking nearby. He did his best to evade their sights. However, after passing through a dense patch of shrubbery, his high awareness warned him of impending danger. 8. A rustle, rustle, rustle. 8. A large silhouette charged past the shrubs and pounced at him. He instinctively dodge-rolled and avoided the sudden attack. But not before getting a good look at the enemy's appearance. It was a marsh monitor, a species of large lizards that lurked in this map. The one that appeared was over 2 meters in length. Its dark green skin was speckled with black. Sharp protrusions grew from its head and tail. These protrusions along with its claws were covered in a viscous green poison which caused paralysis. Those unlucky enough to be struck by this poison would be unable to move for 3 seconds. The paralyzing poison was the marsh monitor's most dangerous weapon. It's these guys. He felt a bit apprehensive. Although these lizards had relatively low health and were quite frail, the consequences of being struck by their attacks were fatal. In his previous life, an expert had once left some words of advice. Under no circumstances should you underestimate a monster because even the weakest of marsh monitors was still capable of causing death. At the lower levels, these lizards were the nemesis of all mages and thieves, since these professions relied on their mobility to survive. In the event a thief or mage became paralyzed, these marsh monitors could freely rip them to shreds. Even heavy armored fighters were susceptible to being killed by these lizards if they were careless. Marsh monitor, level 6. Health, 360. The marsh monitor's attack struck her as its body fell back to the ground. A crush. 8. Its heavy-set body sent mud and water flying everywhere. At the end of the roll, Nian retrieved his dagger and wielded it in his right hand in a reverse grip. He returned with concussive strike, assassinate, and vital strike. A'79, A'83, A'97. Then he finished with a flurry of attacks before the concussive strike's stun duration timed out. Afterward, the marsh monitor trembled and collapsed to the ground. These lizards truly were frail. As long as the player wasn't hit, they were extremely easy to kill. Under Nian's assault, the marsh monitor hadn't been given the slightest bit of leeway and was killed in their first exchange. After switching over to level 5 equipment, his attack rose to over 60 points. Honestly, to the present player base, such a high attack was simply unimaginable on a thief. Coupled with his profession's innately fast attacks, his damage per second rose to an unprecedented degree. Apart from the leaders of the major guilds, very few players wore equipment of his quality. Even if they did, he still possessed the chapter of courage. Even though he had fought and killed the marsh monitor, which was above his level, he didn't feel the slightest bit of strain and was entirely in his element during the battle. This was the result of his high willpower and awareness, overbearing attack power, extreme maneuverability, and fast attack speed. He killed several more marsh monitors along the trek forward. Due to his agility and speed, not a single one was able to reach him. The further he traveled into the marsh, the denser the fog became, obscuring his vision even more. This caused him to be extremely careful with every step forward. Although he could easily kill these marsh monitors, if he were struck once, they could do the same to him as well. The dense fog rolled and drifted in the air. From time to time, he would see strange shadows appearing and disappearing within it. These illusions were the remnants of a forgotten battlefield. The sounds of soldiers roaring and cavalry charging into battle could be faintly heard in his ears. However, as soon as the cold wind blew again, these desolate illusions of a distant play would drift away with it. Suddenly, he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. They were heavy, but amidst the other sounds, He couldn't distinguish if they were real. He didn't notice anything unusual until he felt the ground begin to shake. Only then did he realize his situation wasn't good. He swept his gaze towards the direction of the footsteps and saw a marsh monitor crawling out of a nearby brush. The moment he saw its scarlet red tongue flicking out of its mouth, a strong fishy smell assaulted his nose. This lizard was 5 meters in length. It was supported by 4 powerful limbs and a thick, long tail that was covered in spikes. Its entire body was covered in ash-black scales save for a patch of white which formed a strange pattern on its neck. Even for the original inhabitants of Natlan Swamp, this lizard was an extremely terrifying existence. The white pattern on its neck represented an old mystery as well as death. This lizard was clearly different from the others he had met. The giant lizard noticed his presence and charged, its tail twisting and turning as it ran in an awkward gait. Though awkward as it may be, its speed was not to be trifled with. In reality, this unique gait was the reason it could move so quickly. In merely a brief few seconds, it had already arrived in front of him. He activated swift retreat to pull some distance while simultaneously examining it with transcendent insight. Serpentine lizard, sub-elite, level 7, health, 1200. His heart filled with shock when he read its name. Why the hell did I end meeting this guy? These lizards only roamed around the Natlan marshland and were sub-elite monsters. At his current level, let alone a level 7 sub-elite, even if he met a leader-class monster at his own level, he'd still have no choice but to flee. The only reason he was able to take on Gato the Lion King and the Ogre Devourer was because they spawned in areas with exploitable terrain. However, in this marshland, there was no such terrain to speak of, and it was impossible for him to face it head-on. These lizards were the true overlords of this map. Although the serpentine lizard didn't have very much health compared to other sub-elites at the same level, it compensated with an exceedingly high attack. It could also release its poison into the mud and spread it through a mist. Level 10 or lower players were simply no match for this monster in a one-on-one fight. Only a party of 5 or more level 10 players would dare to take on this overgrown lizard. In his original timeline, since many players ended up dying at their hands while training in this area, they were nicknamed the Killers of the Marsh. The serpentine lizard closed the distance in an instant and arrived in front of him, spewing out a poisonous mist from its mouth. After being released from its mouth, the green mist rapidly dispersed into the surroundings. While within it, only a slight whiff would cause the player to become confused and dazed. A'20 broken bar A'20 broken bar A'20 broken bar. What a strong corrosive poison. Nian didn't dare to meet the serpentine lizard head-on. He rolled out of the poisonous mist, slipping past its head, and landed right next to it. In fact, he was so close he see each ashen black scale. The serpentine lizard immediately swept its thick and powerful tail at him in response. The tail resembled a whip as it whistled through the air at a ridiculous velocity. He'd be done for if the lizard's attack were to land. Even if he was lucky enough to survive, he'd still end up losing the greater half of his health. Swift retreat. His movement speed explosively increased by 30%. Even then, it barely allowed him to keep up with the serpentine lizard. He quickly pulled away and evaded the attack by a hair's breadth. Then, he turned tail and leapt over a large patch of shrubbery whereupon he gracefully landed back on the ground and fled for his life. The serpentine lizard shifted its massive 5-meter body and went in immediate pursuit. 2 silhouettes, one large and the other small, rapidly traversed the marshes. Nian glanced back from the corner of his eye and noticed the serpentine lizard shortening the distance by every second. He activated a basic haste scroll and bolstered his speed by another 20%. Although its target had been pulled further away, the serpentine lizard didn't falter and continued to give chase. They were known as the most difficult monster to deal with in the marsh. The moment they set their sights on their prey, as long as it was still within the boundaries of the marsh, they would be unrelenting in their pursuit. Nian's mind was in turmoil. He knew swift retreat's duration wouldn't last long, and when the timer ran out, the serpentine lizard would close the distance and catch up. His eyes frantically swept over the surroundings as he searched for some way to live. Although he knew it would be incredibly difficult to survive this encounter, He didn't want to sit and wait for death. When all seemed lost, a surge of electricity emerged amidst the gaps of some distant thickets. His pupils contracted as his heart rapidly beat with excitement. He immediately moved towards the source of this magic. Though a forbidden zone for low-level players, the Natlan Marsh was a wonderland for experts, a statement which held especially true for elite teams. Many of them came here for no other reason than to retrieve a certain item that could be found in this marsh, the Revive skill book. The marsh monitors had a 1 in 10,000 chance of dropping this skill book. Despite its low drop rate, it was heavily sought after because of its incredible value in a team, so much that its importance far outstripped everything else. A priest who learned the skill could revive a fallen teammate. Such an effect was a substantial buffer against potential losses in the run. At times, it could even save the team from being completely wiped. Other than the Revive skill book, players could find decent equipment such as the Moonchaser staff, which gave lightning damage +9 and intelligence +5, and the Sacred Wind mallet, which gave Holy Shield +8 and Resilience +5. The common mobs in the marsh did drop silver or gold grade equipment, but like the Revive book, their drop rates were quite low. The equipment that came out of this map were of good quality. Moreover, since a team had recently found the Revive skill book while training here, increasingly more players flocked to this map in search of it. Therefore, the number of experts in the marsh weren't all that few. Elemental temple magic, which could only be learned by elementalists, came from the various elemental shrines scattered across the continent. It was divided into 16 ranks, with rank 16 denoting the highest possible rank. The Thousand Swallows Burst from just a moment ago was classified as a rank 1 elemental temple magic. It had a long channeling time, requiring a full set of syllables to successfully cast. The long casting time made it impractical in 1 versus 1 battles. As for team battles, it could be easily cancelled by a paladin using silence. Such reasons made it unsuitable for PvP. Not to mention its lengthy cooldown period, which came to a total of 2 entire days. Hence, elementalists that learnt rank 1 elemental temple magic would only cast them during emergencies. Naturally, if it was a high-level elemental temple magic, for example the rank 16 mantra of silence, it would be an entirely different case. After Thousand Swallows Burst ended, Candy stealthily circled round a marsh monitor's back. She raised her dagger and struck the back of its head with smothering strike. The dagger flickered with a cold glint as she arced the blade through her target's neck. Her methods were efficient and brutal. The low-health marsh monitor stood no chance and collapsed to the ground. Flame slash. Eternal Sin cleaved down as his great sword was enveloped by an intense blaze. A boom. 8 His blade directly beheaded and cauterized a marsh monitor's neck. The raging flames continued burning until its entire body was charred black. The 5 remaining marsh monitors charged past and they made a beeline for the 3 mages in the rear. However, Eternal Sin roared and stopped them in their tracks by using taunt. The moment his taunt came out, the 5 lizards immediately aggroed onto him and unleashed a flurry of attacks. A'15. A'16, A'18. A broken bar. Several damage values emerged and rose above his head. Fortunately, his defense was solid, so despite being encircled, these lizards posed no threat. The priest in the rear cast Dispel, removing the paralysis debuff, then followed up with Lesser Heal. As a result, Eternal Sin immediately recovered a large chunk of health. With all 5 marsh monitors aggroed onto him, Eternal Sin brandished his great sword and activated Whirlwind Slash. Immediately, his spinning blade swept through their bodies and dealt over 50 damage to each. Suyan, White Smoke, and the Arcane Mage continued casting spells in the rear. Despite being besieged by marsh monitors, Eternal Sin firmly held his ground like an immovable boulder. The earth was splattered with blood, some from the lizards and some his own. Amidst the madness that shone in his eyes, he erupted in a frenzy intertwined with ruthlessness and bloodlust. His entire being was akin to an enraged beast, his every action hammering fear into one's heart. Suyan and the others couldn't help but tremble when witnessing Eternal Sin in such a state. He was simply a killing machine that maniacally swung his sword for slaughter. The only one who remained unperturbed was Candy. She curled her lips and uttered, boring a broken bar before lightly yawning. She then rummaged through her knapsack and took out a piece of fruit candy that could be bought at the NPC general store. Popping it into her mouth, she entered stealth and approached to monitor lizard from the rear. Smothering strike. Upon activating the skill, she struck the lizard on the backside of its head with the pommel of her dagger. Now that it was stunned, her blade easily pierced its flesh and sent out a spray of blood. Eternal Sin and his team had fairly good synergy. Within a brief time span, they were able to easily make short work of the dozen or so lizards. Candy retrieved her dagger from a marsh monitor's corpse and calmly wiped off the blood. Big guy, the monsters here are too scarce. Let's go somewhere else, Candy said to Eternal Sin. Only Candy would dare to call him in such a way since the others didn't have the nerves to do so. This sense of familiarity came from having known each other for a long time. As for how long, no one knew. However, one fact remained consistent throughout the years: whenever Dark Empire was overturning the entire world of those previous games, Candy was never absent. Although Candy and Eternal Sin didn't establish a guild, the rallying power they held within conviction was still extremely astonishing. Eternal Sin strapped his greatsword on his back and turned to face the other members. Let's take a small break. We'll switch locations afterwards. And so, atop a mound of dry earth under the shade of a tree, 6 players rested while eating bread and drinking spring water. Cloaking and awareness were directly opposing stats. In situations where the opponent was a thief under the effects of stealth, they could only be seen clearly if the other party's awareness was higher than the thief's cloaking by 50% or more. When the two stats were equal, the thief could be spotted if the other player concentrated hard enough while searching. If the thief was good, however, then in situations where cloaking exceeded the defending side's awareness, the opposing player would be stunned before they even had a chance to react. Naturally, this wasn't to say that when a thief was discovered their attacks could be easily avoided. After all, thieves were innately fast, whether it be in terms of movement or attack. In a certain region within the marsh, the air distorted to reveal a silhouette. Its owner was Candy, who had activated stealth and disappeared. Earlier on, she had re-emerged at Nian's rear. Her attack was terrifyingly fast as she attempted to strike him in the back of the head. A single concussive strike would leave him stunned long enough to allow the mages to send him directly to the graveyard. However, before Candy even approached his back, he had already discovered her presence. Those 19 points in awareness weren't just for show. He smoothly leaned to the side and avoided her strike. After dodging, he pivoted his foot and struck back with his own concussive strike, aimed directly at her temple. What a decisive attack! Candy rapidly pulled back, evading by just a hair's breadth, before distancing herself from Nian. This thief had somehow discovered her. Just how high was his awareness? Not to mention his quick reaction speed and even fiercer counter. His movements were as natural as the floating clouds and flowing waters, a matchless style which left her heart in shock. What a strong guy! At the moment, the average player was still quite low level, and although there weren't many methods of attack, close combat was the best judge of the opposing player's experience and skills. An expert. Candy was instantly convinced of this thought, though she wasn't disheartened. In fact, she was delighted since things wouldn't be interesting otherwise. Just as their exchange ended, the serpentine lizard chose this moment to charge at Nian from the side. Its gigantic body drew increasingly closer as its gaping maw appeared wider with each passing millisecond. He sidestepped the attack, locked his eyes onto a tree in the distance, then extended his left hand and shot out a line of webbing from his ring of woven silk. He jerked the web line and pulled himself out of immediate attack range. The serpentine lizard's attack had struck thin air yet again, enraging it to no end. It swung its body around and charged at Nian once more. In the brief moment when it had lost sight of him, Nian activated a basic haste scroll and bolted towards the 3 mages at Eternal Sin's rear. For the sake of preserving his life, he had no choice but to lead the serpentine lizard towards them, otherwise, he'd have no chance of surviving. Eternal Sin firmly grasped his greatsword and blocked the approaching opponent's path. He readied himself and prepared to attack when Nian entered his range. A thief's innately frail defense meant that as long as he got in a few strikes, they could be easily killed. As Nian drew closer, Eternal Sin stared fixedly at him and the serpentine lizard in tow. At this point, it would be hard to avoid a confrontation with the lizard, though the most immediate issue was Nian. They needed to kill him off, otherwise it had become quite annoying if he started wreaking havoc while they fought it. Although Nian initially had no enmity with Eternal Sin and his group, when he led such a disaster towards them, it'd be quite normal for them to hate his guts. Yet at the same time, this was also the wilderness, a place where life or death depended on skill. So even if they died, they would have no one to blame but themselves since they lacked the strength to survive. By now the serpentine was about to overtake Nian, but the latter was likewise about to enter Eternal Sin's range. Eternal Sin brandished his blade and completely sealed off his path. It appeared he was going to match the serpentine lizard and perform a pincer attack. Nian fully understood that the other party really wanted him dead. There was an enemy in front and another chasing from behind. He was being forced onto a narrow path. If he were to have the slightest slip up, the serpentine lizard would pounce on him and Eternal Sin wouldn't hesitate in cutting him down where he stood. Seeing his opponent enter striking distance, Eternal Sin directly slashed down as a blade of light flew towards Nian's face. In the same instant, Nian fiercely pivoted and leapt toward a nearby thicket. The blade of light struck Nian mid-leap and drew blood, followed by 2 explosions as a holy smite and a bolt of lightning landed afterwards. A'65, A'89, A'72. Several damage values rose above his head, and he had nearly lost all of his health with a little over a tenth remaining. Shit, just how far can he leap? Eternal Sin immediately felt his heart sink after seeing Nian successfully escape through the bushes. How high or how far a player could leap was based on the strength and jump stats as well as weight load. The upper limit of how high a player could leap was 5 meters. The higher strength and jump were, the more powerful the leap. On the other hand, as weight increased, jump range decreased. Fortunately for Nian, his weight load was light, and he possessed the chapter of courage which provided 15 points in jump. It was no wonder his leap was so astonishing. Eternal Sin was confident in obstructing and pinning Nian down. He had even perfectly matched the timing of his attack with the serpentine lizard. If things had proceeded without a hitch, his opponent would have been dead in less than 5 seconds. Yet, never did he expect that Nian would turn into a frog and bound across the bushes to escape. In the next moment, the serpentine lizard arrived at Nian's previous position. It had lost sight of its target. Fortunately, there was new prey standing right beside. It immediately turned around and pounced at Eternal Sin. He had been tricked. As he stared at the giant lizard already in mid-leap, he knew he didn't have the chance to retreat. He brandished his greatsword and stepped forward to meet it head-on. "Everyone, be careful of that thief. Candy, go after him," Eternal Sin promptly commanded, then focused on repelling the serpentine lizard's attacks. He feared Nian would turn back and sneak attack the mages in the back line. The situation could get dangerous if Nian got within melee range of the mages. His could easily overwhelm them using his skill and agility, especially against the priest who couldn't put up much of a fight. "No worries, just leave it to me." Candy's eyes flashed with a peculiar expression. This guy's quite skilled. After successfully baiting Eternal Sin into engaging the serpentine lizard, Nian turned around to examine the scene. Seeing as Eternal Sin and the serpentine were already fighting, he felt somewhat alleviated of his stress. "I finally got that lizard off my tail. Should I take advantage of the situation to get rid of them or should I just leave?" Nian pondered for a moment. "Let's watch and see for now." A broken bar. Nian entered stealth and began blending in with the background before completely disappearing from view. The mages at the rear spotted Nian's dissipating silhouette from across the bushes. When they noticed they couldn't detect his presence, they couldn't help bunching up a little. Despite their surroundings seeming completely empty, they felt an enormous pressure weighing down on them. Candy also entered stealth and scanned the surrounding for traces of Nian. However, she didn't dare to stray too far from the mages. A thief in hiding posed too much of a danger to lightly armored professions. The only sound that emanated from the scene was the battle between Eternal Sin and the serpentine lizard. Eternal Sin's defenses were high so he could hold it off temporarily. After a short while, The mages and the priest also began casting their spells. Nian glanced at his health bar. Only a slight sliver remained. He hid behind the cover of the bushes and began applying bandages. +20 a broken bar, +20 a broken bar, +20 a broken bar. He restored 200 health after 10 seconds. Only then did he loosen his mind that had been edge ever since he encountered the serpentine lizard. Afterwards, he quietly observed the battle. Eternal Sin firmly held his ground as the priest healed him and mages dealt damage. Their composure and synergy left him wondering why he didn't recognize them. They were such a strong team. However, after thinking about it for a while, it made sense. In his original timeline, there were countless experts who were reserved and didn't reveal their strength. It was quite normal that he didn't recognize them. The serpentine lizard's attacks were especially ferocious. Even if Eternal Sin's defense was very high, he would still find them somewhat difficult to endure. 8 hiss, hiss. 8 just as its scarlet tongue flickered in and out, the lizard opened its jaw and spat out a green globular substance. Upon contact with the air, it near instantaneously turned gaseous, rapidly expanded, and enshrouded everything within a 2-meter radius in a poisonous mist. A'30 a broken bar, A'30 a broken bar, A'30 a broken bar. Damage values continuously rose above Eternal Sin's head with each passing second. Each one of the serpentine's attacks dealt more than 80 damage to his health. At the rate the battle was currently going in, he wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Death Speech, hurry up and cast Dispel. The team's priest, Death Speech, responded and hurriedly cast Dispel as a gentle ray of pure white fell on Eternal Sin's position. The light reacted with the poisonous mist and within an instant, caused it to dilute by a great degree. Eternal Sin glanced at his health bar which only had 160 health remaining, though he didn't have much time to ruminate over it. As the serpentine lizard resumed its assault, he raised his greatsword in an effort to resist its attack, but the lizard latched onto him and bit out a chunk of flesh. A'76 tendon break. Eternal Sin struck out in retaliation. The serpentine lizard's movements immediately turned sluggish as it temporarily entered a crippled state. Taking advantage of this brief window, he hurriedly drew back in order to open some distance. Just at that time, Ulfa, lightning magic, the elementalist, finished his incantation and cast Freeze Frost, whereupon a thin layer of ice began covering the serpentine lizard and slowed its movements even more. This freeze effect was trademark of an elementalist's ice magic. Death Speech promptly followed up by casting Lesser Heal, while Eternal Sin downed a basic recovery potion to supplement the healing. After the initial burst of healing, the red of his health bar continued to steadily rise. Even while recovering, Eternal Sin stayed on full alert as he knew the thief didn't go too far. If he emerged and caught them off guard, it would be difficult to predict the outcome of the battle. Just as his health replenished by 3/4, the cripple and freeze debuffs wore off, and the serpentine lizard came rushing forward. Sub-elite monsters were truly too difficult to deal with. Even Eternal Sin, who wore Death's Sacrifice +2, lost health at such a rapid pace. If it were another team with worse equipment, they would have long wiped by now. Despite their combined efforts, the serpentine lizard still had a little over 70% health remaining. 8 Candy, have you found him yet? 8 Eno. I have no idea where that slippery bastard ran off to. 8 Everion, remain alert. Suyan, white smoke, be ready to use that spell. 8 understood. 8 Suyan replied promptly. After having known each other for so long, Eternal Sin only needed to say a few words and she would understand what was needed of her. Although Nian couldn't listen in on what Eternal Sin and his team were conversing about, he knew it concerned him. However, they were heavily overestimating themselves. As a thief with over 10 years of experience, he wouldn't allow himself to be caught so easily. Their team isn't bad. They might actually be able to kill it. Our broken bar. He stared intently at the ferocious serpentine lizard. A level 7 sub-elite, who knows what sort of items it'll drop. For the time being, he didn't have any immediate plans of going against Eternal Sin and his team. However, It wouldn't necessarily be too late to decide after the two sides wore each other out a little further. Eternal Sin brandished his great sword. He fiercely slashed down on the serpentine lizard's body and dealt incredibly high damage. You at your manners at? Eternal Sin asked in the team chat. Was 67%. Was 78%. Was 32%. Ulfar cast his gaze at Eternal Sin's expression, afraid that he would get angry. Is it so low? Eternal Sin furrowed his brows and asked. When the battle started, my mana wasn't fully recovered. Then later on, I used several high damage spells. A broken bar. Oh enough, just conserve what's left of it. Eternal Sin didn't say more after listening to Ulfar's explanation. Ulfar switched to the low mana cost High Sorrow. After a while, his mana was still low, so he drank a basic mana potion and restored his mana to 67%. Nian fled the battle, but he didn't immediately leave the area. Instead, he took a detour and circled round the perimeter before stopping to scan his surroundings. Eventually, he spotted a slope not too far in the distance. He dashed toward the slope and promptly arrived at its peak, whereupon he looked over in the direction of Eternal Sin and his team. Despite the somewhat low visibility, the light show of magic and clamor signaled that the battle was still ongoing and quite fierce. At first, for the sake of preserving his life, he only planned to borrow their hand in killing the serpentine lizard and nothing else. However, since they tried to kill him, he wouldn't sit by idly and let them enjoy their meal in peace. No, the temptation of obtaining the equipment dropped by a level 7 sub-elite couldn't be abandoned so easily. Thus, Candy and the others were unaware that Nian hadn't actually fully retreated but was instead spying on them from atop a slope. After believing they had finally driven that hateful thief away, Eternal Sin and his team inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. Just a moment ago, he was in quite a panic due to being routed by the Quagmire. If anything had happened to the priest in the rear, he would have been a goner as well. Luckily, Candy discovered that thief before it was too late and helped them avert a disaster that could have wiped the team. Good work. You all did well. Eternal Sin praised in the team chat. You were just lucky. That guy isn't so easy to deal with. We need to be careful if we ever encounter him in the future. Candy replied, ending the celebrations early. Eternal Sin assumed that with her skills, the other side wouldn't be able to gain the slightest advantage over her, but it was clear that assumption was wrong. That thief was quite astonishing. After forcing Nian away, killing the serpentine lizard became much more relaxed. Bang, bang, bang. The serpentine lizard was bombarded by several spells. Its body was charred and bloody, and many of its scales had been split open. This recent barrage shaved away 160 health. The lizard was already at death's door. It simply lacked that one final nudge. Yet even in its death throes, the lizard did not give up and revealed its final trump card. It flickered its tongue and spat out a peculiar mist. Unlike the previous times, the mist was far denser and was pitch black in color rather than the normal green. It rapidly expanded and encompassed everything with a radius of 20 meters. Suyan, White Smoke, and the other mages had hastily retreated when the mist began to expand. While Eternal Sin, who was at the epicenter of the skill, missed his attack and saw the shadow of the lizard bolt away. The sudden change took him by surprise, causing him to be dazed for a brief moment before realizing what was going on. Over there. It's trying to escape. Eternal Sin roared. This was the first time they had come across a sub-elite that ran away when at low health. However, it didn't mean they had never heard of them. Several elite class field bosses would also use a skill to try and flee after falling below a certain health. Asked one of the mages. Under the cover of the mist, their vision was completely blocked and it was impossible for them to find their target. Suyan suddenly saw a shadow flash past some bushes. She raised her staff and prepared to cast a spell. Just as she spoke the first syllable to the incantation, a broken bar. System. Target is outside of spell range. She helplessly cancelled the incantation. By the time the mist dissipated, any traces of the serpentine lizard would have long disappeared. 8 Eat escape aid a broken bar. 8 Suyan lowered her staff. 8 In which direction? 8 Eternal Sin asked. They had poured enormous amounts of effort into getting the serpentine lizard's health bar to barely a sliver of health. If it escaped just like that, wouldn't that mean all their hard work had gone to waste? A tilde over there. A tilde.